She never thought that in her 40s her life would change abruptly. It would seem that everything was going her way: a successful marriage, a decent job, a house, a full cup, and a beautiful daughter went 2 weeks ago to conquer Beijing. What else could a woman dream of? But it was not so simple. That morning, when a woman who identified herself as Jessica called her and asked her to come down to her car, Melanie's first thought was that she might have blocked someone's exit or been hit by someone else's car door. As usual, she left a note with her contacts under the windshield wiper. After answering the phone, Melanie dressed quickly and went downstairs with only a jacket on. However, there was no one near her bright red car. The yard was nearly empty. By 11 o'clock, there were almost no cars left in the parking lot, and the drizzle had chased away the few passers-by and the elderly women who liked to expose their faces to the sun on the benches. Melanie looked around in bewilderment, but saw no signs of life. She slowly walked over to her car and began to inspect it. The woman was a little nearsighted, so she didn't immediately notice the brown envelope sticking out from under the windshield wiper. "What the hell is that?" Melanie muttered. She tugged at the envelope, but immediately thought she shouldn't touch unidentified objects. Curiosity got the better of her. Melanie ripped open the edge of the thick package. Inside were pictures. "With me?" the woman thought. "No, they're all blurry. They're definitely not of me." Melanie squinted, trying to get a better look at the contents of the pictures, but all she could see were silhouettes, and the quality of the photos themselves was poor. She looked around the yard with a pang in her head for anyone. Melanie made the most sensible decision not to freeze in the rain in her slippers, but to go home, where it was warm, dry, and she had her glasses. But when Melanie put on her glasses, she immediately regretted it. Melanie would rather have remained standing under the drizzling fall sky, blissfully ignorant. She looked at one photograph after another, but with each new picture her face grew more and more gloomy. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" Melanie mumbled to herself in bewilderment and wanted to laugh, but her intuition told her that what she was seeing was not a joke or a montage. In the first photo, Edward was sitting behind the glass of a cafe. It would have been strange, because coffee was always respected in their family. But Melanie's husband was holding some girl's hand, holding it gently. Even the photo showed it. Melanie tensed, but immediately dismissed the suspicion. She dismissed it too soon. In the second photo, Edward was already playfully holding his companion, covering the passenger door of his fancy car. But the most interesting part began on the third card. The pictures were large format. Melanie could savor the details of this portrait. Her dear and beloved husband, passionately embracing his vis-a-vis, with his free hand opened the door of the famous hotel in the city. It was where Melanie and Edward had celebrated their 15th anniversary 5 years ago. The memory of the place was still fresh. That made Melanie's heart sting in a treacherous way. But the next pictures were taken from a completely different point of view, and the optics were better. The third-floor window of the hotel was the central character in the shot. They didn't even draw the curtains. "Okay, that's Edward," Melanie said, laughing hysterically. "You're out of your mind. He's a grown man, and he can't even think. I couldn't think better of him." And through these curtains outside the hotel room window, everything that was going on in the room was clearly visible. Melanie wouldn't show such a thing to her children, and she would prefer not to watch it herself. But alas, there was no turning back time, and there was no memory wipe function in the woman's head. Melanie bit her lip and carefully placed the pictures on the table. There was no desire to review them. Everything was clear enough. Melanie just didn't know how to be hysterical. Ever since she was a child, she had been unusually calm and reserved. She had pissed off her mother, a woman who was boring and prone to swearing. "That's incredible," Melanie grinned to herself. Edward was a good man. He cheated, so it was fine. And he didn't even show it. He'd always been so thoughtful and caring. I wonder what he was missing. I mean, we had a good thing going. I don't understand men. What am I supposed to do now? She thought aloud. Should I throw a tantrum? They say it's always both men's fault when they cheat. But no, I just don't get it. We've been married for 20 years, through so much went through. Tired or just adventurous? No, I'm not going to put up with this. What if it's a joke after all? Melanie questioned. Why would anyone send me these pictures? Should I call? She immediately dialed the number. She dialed the number of the woman who had called her, who had probably left the pictures on the car. There was no answer for a long time. Melanie was about to hang up, but suddenly a cheerful voice came from the other end of the line. "Hello. Wait." "I'm sorry," Melanie began, trying to choose her words. "Did you call me the other day and ask me to come down to the car?" "Melanie?" the woman said. "Yes, I think you already got my message." "If you mean the photo, yes," Melanie grinned. "I'm just not sure what to make of it. The content of the pictures speaks for itself." "Excuse me, but who are you?" Me, the woman sighed. "My name is Jessica. I believe I've already introduced myself. I'm a private investigator. You know, tracking down unfaithful spouses, looking for missing kittens and so on." "You do?" Melanie was surprised. "But how come you were following my husband?" "I didn't hire anyone. Moreover, I had no idea that he was going off to the left." "That's the way it is," Jessica laughed nervously. "You see, I was hired by the husband of the lady who accompanies your Edward in the photo," Jessica explained. "He insisted that I give you the pictures. I don't make that decision on my own." "Not even like that?" Melanie was surprised. "I wonder why this man would want to contact me. But his wife is cheating on him. You'd have to deal with it yourself. Is it really necessary to involve third parties?" "You, by the way, in fact, destroyed my strong marriage," she said with offense. "Don't you think that's a bit much? Maybe I wanted to continue to live in blissful ignorance. The less you know, the better you sleep, as they say." "Are you serious?" Jessica grinned. "Of course, it might be easier for many people, but I think it's better to know the truth. And the sooner that happens, the better. Who knows how long he would have led you on and what it would have led to in the end." Melanie thought for a moment. "And yet, to be honest, I'm at a complete loss. It's hard to know whether this information is for the good or not. Either way, I can't undo what I've done. But how can I be sure it's not a montage? Maybe you're just trying to slander my husband. Or maybe you're just a fraud and you're trying to get what you want. What could I possibly be after?" Jessica objected. "Scammers usually ask for money, and I just gave you the pictures. If you don't want to believe me, it's up to you, but if you still doubt, it's easy. I can give you the photos in their original form, all the shooting I did on a professional camera, and the sources are in my computer. Can you come to my office? I have nothing to hide." "I don't see the need for that," Melanie said. "I'll believe you, especially since I don't know much about all this, and I think that if you want, you can fake the original pictures. But what am I supposed to do with all this information now? You're such an interesting woman. You gave me the dirt, and that's it. And now I'm sitting here thinking." "You're right about that," Jessica sighed. "I'm sorry I made you worry, but I'm telling you, I did everything on my client's orders." "Then maybe you'd be so kind as to give me his contact information so I don't scold you for nothing," Melanie suggested. "Let him have it." "I'm not at liberty to divulge such information," Jessica replied. "The only thing I can do is to let him know you want to talk to him, and he will contact you if he feels it necessary." "Do as you see fit," Melanie said. "But I don't think I want to talk to him." "I won't waste any more of your time, Jessica. I won't thank you. It's not the right situation, but I'll give you credit." Melanie didn't wait for an answer and pressed the hang-up button. Her mind was a mess. She should have gone to Jessica's office. But Melanie didn't feel like contacting anyone right now. All she wanted to do was spit in her Edward's face and never see him again. Not that Melanie was the kind of woman who didn't want to deal with the situation. Oh no, she wanted to. She just didn't know what to say or do in such cases. Melanie had always been proud of her marriage. She had met Edward when they were young, at a college festival. Edward had immediately noticed Melanie's bright appearance and artistry, and he wasn't the only one. She remembered vividly how her future husband and another suitor, Peter, had fought for her hand and heart. Both boys had been boxing at the time and had set up a makeshift ring in the garage. Peter lost. Melanie wasn't particularly upset she didn't take them seriously. She appreciated Edward's feat, however. She treated his abrasions and applied band-aids, saying, "What a fool you are, Edward." Should I have proved my feelings to you like that? They married when Melanie was 19. She had just entered her sophomore year, and Edward was already working as a process engineer at a chemical plant. Melanie's mother was not happy, believing that her daughter deserved a better party than a penniless engineer. But Melanie rarely considered her mother's opinion. Moreover, this lady was rarely guided by common sense. That's why she was left alone with a 1-year-old daughter in her arms. Liv Young began to live in the apartment, which Melanie inherited from her father. Despite disagreements with his former wife, John about his daughter did not refuse, supported her as he could. But he could not rejoice in the happiness of his beloved daughter. He did not live for 6 months. Melanie and Edward lived amicably. They had never been in love. But with Ashley's birth, the marriage only grew stronger. Melanie transferred to a correspondence school so that she wouldn't have to take a leave of absence because of her pregnancy. She studied hard and almost immediately went to work. By that time, Edward was already working as a leading engineer, having managed to build a good career in a few years, and then he went into private business. Business was booming, their daughter was growing up, and money began to appear in the family. The couple got a luxury country house, every year traveled to a new country. And soon young Ashley was seriously interested in China. After another trip, all her thoughts were occupied with this country. Her parents paid for language courses and often took her to the Celestial Empire, so that her daughter could get better acquainted with foreign culture. Ashley was thrilled. Melanie herself was equally thrilled. She loved traveling with her daughter and watching Ashley develop her passion. By the time she was 13, she knew that sooner or later she would go to live and work in China. Only Edward did not share her opinion, but continued to pay for tutors, and then Ashley's studies at the Faculty of Oriental Studies. The couple's life went on as usual, with only occasional surprises in the form of sudden appearances from Melanie's mother. And then Ashley left for an internship in the country of her dreams, got a prestigious job in an international company, and stayed there, continuing to study remotely. She rarely came to visit and limited herself to video calls with her parents. Melanie herself, though she missed her daughter a lot, understood perfectly well that Ashley had everything, and there was no point in wanting more. But it turned out that things weren't so good. Melanie stood in the middle of the bedroom, contemplating what to do. The decision came quickly and suddenly, apparently inspired by some of the old Italian movies she and Edward loved to watch together. Well, if she loves Marcello Mastroianni so much, let her be in his shoes, Melanie thought gloatingly, and rushed toward the pantry. So where's the suitcase? Melanie pulled out from under a pile of folded winter clothes the huge wheeled suitcase her husband liked to take on vacation. Edward used to joke that this could easily fit a whole house like a turtle. Melanie grinned. She gently stroked the gold lid of the suitcase with her hand. Her fingers glided over the stickers with the flags and symbols of the different countries the couple had visited over the years. Most of all, Melanie liked the funny fat monkey with a toothy mouth inviting them to Bali. It was their third trip. At that time, compatriots were just beginning to travel to Indonesia. The destination was just gaining popularity. Melanie remembered well how they had been caught in a tropical downpour. It had been an unfortunate misunderstanding that the trip had fallen during the rainy season, but she and Edward had hardly left the hotel then, and it had filled their vacation with a unique romance. Melanie bit her lip angrily and pushed the sentimental memories away. She abruptly threw back the lid of the suitcase and began to put all of her husband's belongings from the shelves into it. Shirts, pants, jackets crumpled mercilessly under their weight. Melanie was not ceremonious with expensive suits, nor with snow-white t-shirts, which her husband loved so much. On top of it all, the woman stacked shoes and sneakers, not forgetting the toothbrush and electric razor. When everything was ready, Melanie proudly rolled the suitcase out into the hallway. The process of packing up her belongings caused her adrenaline to surge. Melanie hadn't felt so elated in a long time, and she was desperate for something to make herself happy. The woman dressed quickly and went outside. It was still drizzling rain. With a wince, Melanie ran to the car and started the engine. The engine rumbled happily, smelling her mistress. Well, let's go, Melanie decided. And now the music is louder, the pedal to the floor and forward towards adventure. But Melanie's adventures were limited to a little shopping at the local mall and a trip to a coffee shop, where the desperate woman allowed herself an unprecedented luxury, ordered a whole cake, and managed to eat it all. On the way home, Melanie realized that such a sweet weakness was unnecessary. When she got up to the apartment, the woman almost tripped over the ill-fated suitcase and immediately went to bed. The overabundance of glucose had energized her at first, but now it was stubbornly demanding a reboot. Melanie fell asleep on the couch. The sound of the door opening woke her up. Melanie opened her eyes and took a long time to adjust to the semi-darkness of the living room. Finally, Edward's voice came from the hallway. "Lion cub. What is this?" he asked in surprise, appearing in the living room doorway. "Are we going on vacation? Are you trying to surprise me? So about such things should be warned in advance. I have work to do." She put a suitcase on the doorstep. "I almost fell in the dark on my vacation." Looking at her husband, Melanie shuddered. "Yes, honey, on vacation. From this very minute, I'm letting you go on vacation. You don't have to waste time packing. I've already packed everything for you. I think I put everything you could possibly need in your suitcase. If I forgot anything, I'll send it by courier." "What courier?" Edward was stunned. "Melanie, are you out of your mind? Or are you still asleep? Why on earth would you let me go anywhere?" "I wasn't going anywhere." "You've packed a suitcase," Edward continued to explain what was going on. "Are you not feeling well?" "I feel fine," Melanie laughed nervously. "And I'm not crazy." "I'm not so sure about you," Melanie said. "I don't get it," Edward frowned. "I don't get it," Edward frowned. Melanie handed him the envelope. Edward took the cardboard folder incredulously and opened it along the tier line. He pulled out the photographs and quickly thumbed through them. A blush flooded the man's face. "This." Stammering, the husband began to justify himself. "What is this? Where did you get this?" "What does it matter where it came from? Good people shared it," Melanie said gloatingly. "It's none of your business." "Let's just skip the questions. Edward, there's no need for that. We're adults now. I don't want any scandal or hysterics, you know. It's not in my nature. Have you done something wrong? Move on. I don't want to discuss it." But Edward looked up at her, not looking at the pictures. "This is pure montage. I've never cheated on you in my life. I'm sure my competitors were just trying to ruin my reputation. How could you believe that? You know, that's what I thought at first. That's what I thought of you. But they're not competitors, Edward. Be a man. Take responsibility for what you do. We're all human beings, and I can even understand you cheating. But don't lose face, at least for now." "But I'm not lying to you," shrieked the husband. "What are you talking about? Cheating and cheating. I've never seen this girl before. I swear to you." "This girl's husband obviously doesn't think so," Melanie squinted at him. "He's the one who gave me those pictures and videos." "Husband? No way." Naomi, then Melanie laughed. "And you said you didn't know her." "Oh, Edward, you were never good at lying. I shouldn't have started." "Why can't it be Naomi?" the man muttered. "My husband gave me the pictures and video of him, yes, but that doesn't change anything. The pictures were given to me by the private investigator this man hired to follow you, Edward. Tell me honestly, just straight up honestly." "How long have you been with her?" Melanie asked. "You don't hire detectives for a one-time fling. There was no point in denying it." Edward took a deep breath and sank down in his chair. "Now that it's turned out this way." "Melanie, I'm sorry, I should have told you a long time ago. I just chickened out. I don't even know what came over me. Naomi, her and I." "Don't sigh already," as if the young lady were feeling sorry for you, Melanie interrupted him unhappily. "Cheated and cheated. It can't be helped. Just say it as it is. We'll think about forgiveness later." "Okay," the man nodded. "Anyway, Naomi and I have been dating for about a year now. I don't know how it happened. We met at a seminar. She works for the firm of one of our contractors. We just hit it off. Somehow it all went off at once. It was interesting. Then I got drunk, and Melanie. I'm sorry. Just keep talking. I want to know everything." "And everything happened," Edward continued. "I felt so guilty. thinking about telling you everything. But then I ran into her again. And it happened all over again. It was like I was sucked into a whirlpool. Then I found out she was married. But even that didn't stop us. It's just a kind of mental confusion. But Melanie, I promise you I'll break up with her, but I'm sorry. You mean you've had this going on for a year? Melanie shook her head. I didn't even realize it. Do you often go to hotels like this? Don't get cute now. I know a lot of things. Let's see if you're being honest. Once, sometimes twice a week, Edward answered. When her husband was in town, she couldn't see him. He wasn't here much. She and I usually have a hotel room during the day. So? Fine. Just fine. Melanie laughed. I'm surprised I didn't suspect anything. A man who hardly ever shows up here even managed to admit that his wife was unfaithful. You know, at first I was so angry at him for sending it to me. I even thought it would have been better if I hadn't known Melanie continued. But now I look at you and see how pathetic and ridiculous your excuses are. And I realize that I didn't get this information for nothing. You never even loved me. Melanie, what are you talking about? Edward blushed. I don't know how I can make it up to you. I swear I wasn't in control of myself. It's some kind of addiction, a destructive passion. I'll get treatment if I have to. You don't seem to be curing yourself of infidelity. Melanie shook her head. All right, Edward, calm down. What happened is what happened. I don't hold a grudge against you. Everyone steps in, even after years of marriage. But I don't want to live under the same roof with you. So take your suitcase and go. Where am I going, Melanie? What are you talking about? Let's settle this peacefully. What's the point of this scandal? What's the big deal? What's the big deal? We're talking calmly. If you don't want to go, I'll go. Except that this apartment is mine, it was ours. But now that things have turned out this way. You, Edward, are a man of means. You have money. Get your own place. Or live in the cottage until you've made up your mind. I have no claim on it. Or you could go to Naomi. I think her husband's had his say, too. Will you be happy together without complicating things? Melanie. What's Melanie? I've been here 40 years. Melanie never thought she'd be facing something like this at that age. You know very well, Edward, that I'm ready to turn a blind eye to many things, but I can't turn a blind eye to betrayal. Go away. I promise you, go away, I say. Melanie grabbed the remote from the table and swung it at her husband. Edward gave in under her pressure. He'd never seen Melanie like this before. There was such a powerful energy emanating from the woman that Edward was frightened. He waved his hand and left the room. A moment later, Melanie heard the door close behind her husband. Melanie sank helplessly to the couch and burst into tears. She hadn't cried in years. She wasn't the type to let out a tear at the slightest emotion. Right now, it was resentment and misunderstanding that spoke to her, and conscience. Melanie still thought she'd been too harsh in driving her husband away. But immediately, somewhere in the back of her mind, there was a new, still unfamiliar feeling. It spoke of freedom. Saturday morning. The phone vibrated on the nightstand. Melanie turned unhappily and reached for it, but then she accidentally waved her hand, and the smartphone hit the parquet with a resounding thud. Damn it, Melanie scolded, rubbing her eyes and trying to reach her hand to the floor. But where are you? Finally, she managed to fumble for the cold metal casing. Melanie grasped the phone, though it kept trying to slip out of her fingers. God, the woman frowned. It's only 9 in the morning. He can't wait to get me up this early, can he? The caller's number was unknown to Melanie. She didn't call back, thinking if someone needs someone, he'll call back. Melanie lay in bed for a few more minutes, trying to sleep. But sleep evaporated. The woman got up and headed out to make herself some coffee. She usually brewed for 2 and had already poured the usual amount of beans into the coffee maker. But she immediately realized it and even laughed when everything was ready. Melanie went out onto the balcony and lit a cigarette. Only now she realized that she hadn't taken a cigarette since yesterday morning, since Jessica had called her. Melanie even thought that was extremely unlike her, especially since she'd been smoking for years. And when she was nervous, it doubled in number. Melanie looked contemptuously at the cigarette, crushed it into the ashtray and made a clear and conscious decision not to waste any more time and money on this unhealthy habit. Taking a big sip of coffee, Melanie grumbled. The sun was shining brightly outside the window. There was no trace of yesterday's gloom. Even the asphalt had already dried. It's a good thing I don't have to go to work today, Melanie thought. I didn't show up yesterday. Didn't even call them, didn't even warn them. Well, they weren't worried, so they must be okay. I'll explain to Franklin Hanna later. Oh yeah, I'll tell him I wasn't feeling well. I couldn't even make a phone call. The old lady will believe it. She's away for a while anyway. Thank God. Otherwise she'd have been all over me yesterday. Melanie was distracted from her thoughts by the phone. The woman had left it on the table in the kitchen, so she quickly left the balcony to answer it. The number was the same as the one that had woken her up. "Hello," she said in a less than friendly tone. "Melanie?" An unfamiliar male voice answered the phone. "I'm listening." "Pardon me, for God's sake, if I woke you up, I just now realized it's a day off," said the stranger. "My name is Max. We have already met in absentia." "Your number was given to me by Jessica," Melanie grinned. "So you are that deceived husband who decided that he could ruin the lives of others since he himself screwed up. Why are you being so rude?" Max replied in a friendly manner. "I, Melanie, had my reasons." "And what reasons, I wonder?" Melanie wondered. "I can't tell you on the phone yet. You may think it was my revenge on an old enemy." "I don't understand anything at all. I'm sorry, Max, but you're acting strange. What's all this secrecy? Did your wife cheat on you?" "It happens to everyone. My husband cheated on me too. We'll get over it. It's not the first and won't be the last. But I'm still very angry with you. I don't like outsiders interfering in my life." "That's for your own good, Melanie." "Well, it's for your own good. You know where the road is paved with good intentions? Hell. As far as I remember, it's not folk wisdom. It was written in the 12th century by a monk, Bernard Clear, if I'm not mistaken." "Really?" Melanie was surprised. "I remember that its author lived 6 centuries later. His name was Samuel Johnson. He was a poet and a philosopher." "I suddenly remembered," Max answered. Melanie was surprised. Not everyone could give out information like that out of the blue. "What does that mean?" She grinned. "You were also a philosopher once?" "But I didn't make it. I studied at the sociology department. They told us a lot of useful things there, including this one." "What a coincidence." Melanie smiled. "I was a sociology student too. You and I must have studied at the same alma mater. Are you from around here?" "Melanie? I see we're having a good dialogue," Max said. "I'm a little busy right now. If you want to talk to me, even if it's on the subject of philosophy, I'm ready to invite you today and have a snack at lunch." "Why should I go out with you? We don't even know each other." "But we're sort of fellow travelers. We are, aren't we? And since we're connected by a kind of vicious chain, I suggest we get to know each other in person, cry on each other's shoulder." "It's very strange, but somehow I think you're flirting with me." Melanie frowned. "Don't get me wrong. I just thought that since we're both in this situation, we could at least be quiet together. Even though I'm a public person, I don't have any close friends. I don't even have anyone to talk to about what's going on. Naomi was the only one, but I just slammed the door after that. I can't even look at her. So I was thinking, psychologists say that sometimes a stranger can be more helpful than a friend. So walk up to someone on the street. There's always plenty of people to talk to." "No, it's not like that, Melanie." "No, Melanie, don't say no, please. It's a drowning man's request. Don't let me drown." "You are strange, Max," she shook her head. "You forgot my name too," sharply. "Okay, I will not torture you." "What if the advice of these psychologists really works?" Melanie said. "As they say, chutzpah the second happiness. I've always liked people who persevere in their goals. I feel that you are one of them. So I'll give you a chance to talk. Just pick your own place. I don't really go to cafes and restaurants. I'm not very good at navigating." Well, why don't I pick you up at 3? Yes, what's the address? What if you're some kind of freak and you follow me around? Max, I can easily get your address from Jessica. You'll forget it. Still, I'd feel more comfortable driving up to the place myself. What if I want to go somewhere else right now? You call me at 2. Tell me where to meet you. I'll go, just like a woman. Okay, we'll call then, agreed Max. But I beg you, don't be late. I really need to talk to you. Melanie had no idea who this Max was or who he expected to see, so she didn't prepare herself much for the meeting. According to Jessica and the man himself, he was a difficult man. But that didn't bother the woman much. By lunchtime, she put herself in order, gathered her hair in a high ponytail, put on jeans and her favorite sweater. She wasn't going to impress anyone, so she didn't even put on makeup. At exactly 2 o'clock, Max called and appointed a meeting in a cafe. The place was posh. Melanie even thought it would be nice to change clothes. But time was short, and the last thing she cared about was what the people around her thought of her. She decided to walk to the place Max had chosen. The weather was fine, and she didn't feel like looking for a parking lot. After running a couple of blocks, Melanie found herself at the entrance. Lunch was over long ago, so there weren't many people around. She stepped inside and looked around. The room was almost empty, with only a couple of tables occupied by couples and an older man. Melanie walked confidently toward the latter. She figured that's how Max should look, though he sounded younger. "Hello," she addressed the man. "You're not expecting me," Max, the older man, said. "And I'd be surprised if I had such a companion. But you're probably mistaken." "Oh, I'm sorry." Melanie was embarrassed and immediately stepped aside. She took a table by the window. The chair was very soft and comfortable. A porcelain-faced waitress materialized out of thin air and took her order. Melanie didn't think long and asked for green tea, jasmine, and seafood salad. She had an appetite after the walk. The woman looked at her watch. All right, she laughed to herself. She was early herself, and she was bothering grandfather. Well, at least I'll have time to eat. The salad was delicious. Melanie devoured the mussels and shrimp, flavored with some spicy sauce. Good appetite. A pleasant baritone sounded above her ear. Melanie shuddered. "I apologize for being late. Traffic came from somewhere. I was thinking of walking." "Max." Melanie turned around before she could swallow another bite. It wasn't a very good greeting. "Sit, sit," Melanie, the man said, and sat down across from her. It was only then that Melanie got a good look at him. "Oh my God," she breathed out. "It can't be, Peter. Is that you?" "It is." And Melanie, it is the man, nodded. "Now you see why I insisted on seeing you in person." Melanie sat paralyzed. She hadn't seen this man since she'd been a part-time student after her unfortunate boxing match with Edward. Peter had been distant then and hadn't even looked in her direction. And after college, he'd lost her. So that's where the philosophizing came from. She just blurted out, "Peter, how could it be? It's surreal." "God, Melanie, you'll get used to life. It's not like that," Peter replied. "When I found out who Naomi was cheating on me with, I was speechless. I checked everything right away. Melanie's wife is with her lover. And he's the enemy of my youth. Edward. Tell me, is there such a thing?" "No, it doesn't," Melanie laughed. "I can imagine your face when Jessica showed you Edward's pictures," Peter said. "But mine isn't any better now." There was a look of beautiful surprise on his face. "I didn't realize you hadn't changed much," Melanie said. "Only your hair is longer than it was at the Institute." "Peter, I still can't believe it. It's not true. There's no such thing as coincidence. I seriously doubt now that those pictures were real. Come on, is this your way of avenging all your wrongs, Edward?" "If it were a joke, I'd give a lot," Peter sighed. "But it wasn't. And I'm not the kind of man to take revenge. Those photos aren't the only proof of the affair. Jessica did a good job. I've been following Naomi for 3 months. She's a good girl." "All right. She had everything she needed. She had it all." "Did you two talk?" Melanie asked. I kicked Edward out the door last night, she said. I thought I'd been cruel. I could have forgiven him. Today I realize I did the right thing. It would have been okay if he'd made a mistake once. But a year of cheating. The thing I hate most is to be made a fool of. I remember that well. Max laughed. Even your teachers were afraid to argue with you, because they could always be wrong. And then what? Melanie asked. If you're right, fight to the end. That's right. I've always looked up to you, Peter nodded. A girl can put anyone in his place, and you don't need any strength. It was us, fools, who waved our fists. I suffered so much then. I loved her, he continued. I loved you, Melanie, and I really loved you. Was this Edward of yours just a trophy hunter? I'd been friends with him before, and I knew him well. I was surprised when I heard you two were married. I always thought someone great should be around someone like you, Melanie sighed. He was afraid to go near her because he thought he wasn't worthy. What kind of nonsense are you saying? Max laughed. We do not live in the 13th century. Worthy, unworthy people make themselves. Melanie said thoughtfully. Edward, though he turned out to be a scoundrel, was ultimately a good husband and man. He made me feel like I was behind a wall. He was a good father, too. She paused for a moment and then added, I don't know how to tell Naomi now, so I'll hold off for now. She's an adult, she'll get over it. Are you going to get a divorce? Peter asked. Where can I go? Let her live as she wants. I can't forgive her. My pride won't allow it. What have you decided? But Naomi and I haven't lived 20 years. Only 5. It will be easier, Max said. Though only a couple months ago I thought that I would kill her, and forgive, and love, and hate. Now I'm relieved. I won't leave without a penny. She was a close person, even pregnant twice. But God didn't let her carry her to term. She miscarried. She'll get an apartment in the center and a good allowance. I'm not greedy, but let her forget about me. I don't tolerate deceit and hypocrisy. That's how we were brought up in the sociology department, Peter nodded. Remember how much Hannah was worth. She gave everyone the title of ignoramus. It was a shame. It was only later that I realized she was right to set us up like that. You'd do anything to avoid that humiliating label. She taught us honesty and everything. Yeah, she was a great woman. I wish everyone who teaches philosophy could be like that. By the way, that phrase about good intentions was her favorite, Melanie said. Yeah, Max grinned. When you started arguing on the phone about the author of the aphorism, I immediately remembered the second year. That's how life pits people against each other, Peter sighed. It's not like that, but it's not like that either. So what do you do? Max asked. Let's at least talk about life. This whole thing about unfaithful spouses is kind of sad. Yeah, I work for a non-profit organization called Fraser, Peter answered. And we do a lot of charity work, supporting people in difficult circumstances. We help orphanages. Hannah is a strong-willed, iron-willed woman who loves people and won't let anyone go to waste. And I'm her right-hand man, said Peter. Fraser's not young anymore. She turned 10 last year. She can't give up her community work. She likes to do good deeds. I know your Fraser very well, said Max. How? Melanie was surprised. That's strange, Melanie. You yourself say that you do charity work. And where do you get sponsors? Do you pay out of your own pocket? I've been a philanthropist for a long time. I have my own holding. Almost all the supermarkets in town are mine, de facto though. But de jure, they're owned by different companies. I don't like to publicize my holdings. I have a lot of money, but nowhere to spend it. I really don't know where to invest. I'm all over the place. Where do I save? I'm done with Naomi. I don't have kids. If I die, they'll take it all away. So I decided to start a charity. Really? Melanie was surprised. But why haven't I ever seen your name on a list of sponsors? Why would I want to attract attention? I've been with your foundation for a long time, Melanie. I work personally with Hannah. We do business without outsiders. I don't want to start any rumors. You know money likes silence. Happiness. I guess Melanie frowned. Happiness, too. It's better not to talk too much. Remember the old Soviet poster? I have it in my office, the main credo. So you're a powerful and rich man now? Melanie grinned. I didn't think so, and in the institute was so modest. If it wasn't for boxing, you would have been labeled a nerd. Nerds rarely succeed in life, Max replied. Look at all the honors students from yesterday. Fred got drunk at Morgan's. Remember Wilson? Morgan's got one zone behind his back, and he's in jail now, for all I know. The girls got married, Samantha. I don't remember her last name. She was the smartest girl in the class. She used to sit behind you in class. Samantha's life didn't work out, Max said. What about her? We were even friends, Melanie said. But when I got married, I cut off all ties. Samantha died about 7 years ago. Her roommate did it. That's awful. Melanie shuddered, remembering the pleasant, smiling face of her friend. Yes, honors students aren't always happy. Studying is no guarantee of future happiness. Though you're lucky, you're working practically in your specialty. I don't, Max objected. I'm an ordinary merchant. You have to know how to trade, too. I don't stand behind the counter. I make deals with people, establish connections, explore the market. So good for you. I'm always happy for those who succeed with their own mind. Melanie smiled. Thank you, Melanie. Max shone. It's nice to hear from a sincere person. And all around there are only sycophants who want to make money. You can't expect any honesty, smiling for profit. It's normal, Melanie laughed. Everybody wants to eat. Can you judge them for wanting to live a decent life? That's true. But it's possible to be more human, not only to think about profits. Though it wasn't long ago that I realized it myself. About 2 years ago, when Naomi had her last miscarriage. I was really worried. And I realized I was doing something wrong. So I reached out to Hannah. I asked her to help people who didn't have enough money. Good Peter, Melanie stroked his arm. He's always been like that. I'm glad the money didn't ruin you. Look, Melanie, the man suddenly blushed. Would you mind if we could just talk to each other once in a while? What do you mean? She was surprised. No, don't get any ideas. It's just that we're sitting here right now, having a nice chat. I've even forgotten about the time. It's been a while. It's usually just a to-do list in my head. I miss normal human contact, you know? Talking to you, it's like being reborn, like the closest person I've ever met. Don't look at me like that. I'm not exaggerating, Max continued. I even talked to my wife only on business. I don't even blame her for cheating on me. It's like living with a robot. Who would like it? You're the real deal, he smiled at Melanie. Even your simple outfit looks cool in this flashy place. Melanie embarrassedly adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, which showed a large puff. I didn't even think I'd have to come here, she tried to justify herself. It's okay. On the contrary, you look great, like 10 years younger. And you're direct. I like that. I can tell you're not obsessed with the material world. I see you've suffered a lot from the sharks of the material world. If you're so hungry for ordinary human contact, Melanie nodded. Well, let's do it. Why not socialize? I'm alone now, there's not much to do after work or on weekends. We'll at least go to exhibitions and theaters with you. Are you kidding? Max smiled. At exhibitions is not a bad thing. But I can't stand the theater since childhood. But from the simplest walks in the parks and the city will definitely not refuse. I'm all in the office, or at the wheel. I come home, my son, Lucia, I have no strength to go anywhere. It's not even from powerlessness, but from lack of motivation. So my psychotherapist advised me to socialize more often with friends and go for walks in the fresh air. You go to a therapist? Melanie was surprised. Well, not that seriously, Max was embarrassed. It's all the consequences of that apathy. I've been in therapy for 2 years now. I go to sessions out of habit, just to talk, you know. Like in American movies? It really helps when you're locked inside yourself like that. You've got a lot of potential and nowhere to release it. So Naomi didn't help you at all? What's she gonna do? She was just a dress-up doll, Max dismissed her. No, I loved her, of course. But not really, but more out of status and habit. Only recently I realized that I was lying to myself. And did it make you feel better? Max nodded. It makes me feel better, of course. And you'll feel better when you realize that you have no one more precious than yourself, Max continued. We all cling to people, things, times. What's the use? On your deathbed, none of that will be there. There won't be anything left. Only yourself. Your will and conscience will remain. And that's what you should dialogue with. You're getting philosophical, aren't you? Melanie laughed. Let's not do that for now. I know everything for now. I just want to digest all the information and try to start again somehow. Peter, I'm very glad that life brought us together again, even if the circumstances were not the best. I'm glad too, Melanie, honestly. So, shall we be friends? We never stop being friends. Let's just say we've had a forced hiatus. I'm always happy to go out with you. Yes, it's funny, Max smiled. It would probably look funny from the outside. Two old people wandering around the parks with nothing to do. You shouldn't take everything so seriously. Age is a convention, a mark on a passport. Look, old people enjoy life too. I'm always amused when grandparents walk by the hand, and you and I are not old people at all. It used to be 40 when you had grandchildren to take care of, and now we've got everything ahead of us. We've both made it in life. We don't need it. So why not just enjoy every day? You're right, you're infinitely right, Melanie patted Max's hair. Okay, I gotta go. Thanks for getting me out of the house. Then keep in touch, call right anytime. See if you can think of anything interesting. And you can come to my office. Hannah will be surprised, of course. You shouldn't hide your good deeds, my friend. It's respect-worthy, not secrets. Max smiled. I'll think about it, friend. Melanie's life was gradually taking a new direction, and Max was the one who paved the way. Very quickly, she realized that she and the man had a lot in common. It wasn't just limited to student memories. Their views coincided on the vision of the world, tastes in food and clothes, and a lot of things. And they always had a lot to talk about. Max, however, often liked to inject some philosophy into the conversation. Melanie willingly argued on the proposed topics, which incredibly amused the man, who was used to that. Usually his remark or statement puts people in a dead end. Max became a frequent guest at Melanie's house. Once he stayed overnight, though, on the sofa in the living room. Melanie realized that Peter's feelings for her were not friendly. The man repeatedly made ambiguous hints, gave flowers and compliments. Every time they walked under the arm, he tried to put his arm around Melanie's waist, but she was as hard as a rock. It wasn't that she didn't like Max. She did, but not as a man. He was a great conversationalist, an interesting and versatile man, and a reliable companion. But that wasn't enough for romance. In addition, Melanie often caught herself thinking that strongly misses her husband. She did not hurry to file divorce papers, but she did not dare to call him. That morning, Max called Melanie and told her that he was leaving the country for a week for work. "It's just so you don't lose me," he said. But Melanie wouldn't have lost him anyway, to be honest. She was even starting to get a little tired of Max's constant presence around her. It was like he was trying to control her, something Melanie didn't let anyone control her. Even Edward realized it quickly enough, which helped to rid the family of frequent quarrels. Melanie was a free-spirited woman. The evening was free, and the weather was perfect. Suddenly, she was desperate to go to the country. All the more so because it was the weekend. There was nothing to do at work, so she asked Hannah to leave early, picked up some snacks at the supermarket, and jumped in the car. Melanie didn't know for sure if Edward would be at the cottage, but she decided that if he was, she would talk to him. She would spend the night and then drive back in the morning. If not, she would stay the whole weekend. Edward's cottage was in a picturesque spot, only 20 minutes from the city. Melanie had chosen the property herself, and Edward had overseen the construction of the house. The cottage was beautiful, in the spirit of the old days. The two-story log house was surrounded by greenery. There used to be a large garden on the plot. Most of the trees had been preserved, which Melanie was very proud of. It was beautiful, and apples and cherries were always in abundance. And now, at the very beginning of October, large apples were still hanging on the branches, as if beckoning to pick them. No one had harvested this year. Since Edward had left, Melanie hadn't gone anywhere. As she drove up to the house, she realized that someone was living there. The gate was open, and loud music was blaring from the yard. Edward's car was nowhere to be seen, but it might as well have been in the garage. Melanie didn't drive into the yard, but parked in the wide cobblestone lot. She grabbed a bag of groceries and went inside. There was no one in front of the house. Melanie climbed the stairs and pulled open the door. It was unlocked. She entered the dusky hallway, put the groceries on the floor, and went in search of her husband. Edward was sitting in a chair on the spacious patio. A half-empty bottle of wine stood on the table beside him. "Hi," Melanie said loudly. The man flinched and turned around. His face immediately broke into a smile. "Melanie, you're here?" He cheered. "Why didn't you call?" "So you're here after all," the woman came over to him and sat down in a nearby chair. "Where else would I go?" Edward grinned, taking another sip of wine from a cut glass. "Where else? What about your Naomi?" Edward frowned, as if remembering something. "Naomi, that's right. It's all gone, Naomi," he exclaimed. "Gone where?" Melanie wondered. "Hell knows, you kicked me out, and I never heard from her again. Do you think I ran straight to her? What are you looking at me like that for?" "I just wanted to call her and tell her it was over." "I love you, Melanie. I really do," Edward said. "It was only after all this that I realized that I'd spent my whole life thinking otherwise." "Don't get all sentimental on me," Edward, Melanie said. "And what did she say? She didn't even pick up the phone?" "No, she didn't. She blocked my number. It's ringing, and the answering machine is on. I guess hubby's got her pinned down." "Nailed her?" Melanie frowned. "Tell me, do you even know who your Naomi's husband is? Some peddler?" "I've never met him. I only know from her words. I know he's on the road a lot, and he's a complicated man. Rich. Would you be interested, darling? I mean, literally. Your restless Naomi's husband is Peter Skvortsov. I think that's good. You remember him? We were friends, weren't we?" "That can't be right." Edward's eyes widened, as if immediately sobering up. "Max? He was a guy who couldn't even take a punch. And here he was a big businessman. I doubt it." "Don't doubt it," Melanie shook her head. "You were lucky enough to steal a wife from an old enemy. You stole a girl when you were young, and then when you were old enough. That's quite a halo, isn't it?" "How do you know?" Edward perked up. "He contacted me, and he said he was surprised too. He was surprised when he found out the truth." "You've been seeing him?" The man blushed. "Let's say I did. What's the big deal? We had to shed some light on the whole situation. So we talked to him about old grievances and new ones. He's not a bad man, Edward. He doesn't hold a grudge. He even forgave his wife. But he left right away. He didn't want to settle things either. He's waiting for a divorce now." "You seem to have a close relationship with him?" "Well, not tightly, but we see each other sometimes. So, Edward's at the cottage, and Melanie's having fun." "Hey, aren't you confused? First of all, I'm not having fun. I'm just talking to an old acquaintance, something to reminisce about, and I ran into him at work. He does a lot of charity work. Secondly, I see you're not slumming it here drinking wine in your garden. And we have a better house than a lot of apartments," Edward continued. "And third, what do you care how I live now?" "Don't mince words. Of course I care. You're my wife no matter what." "That's how you talk," Melanie grinned. "I haven't remembered that I'm your wife for a year, while I was having fun with my mistress." "And now that you've lost everything, have you come to your senses?" she asked sadly. "I repent. I would give anything to return everything and correct my mistakes. But I'm not omnipotent." "I can't forgive you, Edward." "Is it pride or something else? I don't know. All I know is that I hate you. And the contempt is gone, and Rachel hasn't even said anything yet. And she just called the other day. Thank God it was just for a couple minutes. Otherwise, she would have asked, 'How are you doing?' She called me too, but I was really drunk. I just said I was fine. I knew you wouldn't say anything. Melanie shook her head. Oh, Edward, you must be hungry. Melanie changed the subject abruptly. She felt that if Edward pushed a little harder, the armor would crack. I ate something today, I don't remember. It's always like that, the woman sighed. But how can I leave you alone? I wish you'd hired a housekeeper. I brought groceries. I'll cook something quickly. Stay here for now. Melanie went into the house and started chopping salad. She wondered what she should do next. Meeting Edward had stirred up the feelings inside her again, and the resentment was stirred up too. So she cooked, torn between her inner contradictions. Melanie was visiting Max for the first time. She had not even expected that an ordinary city apartment could be so chic. The woman even felt ashamed of her own home for a moment, though she lived not poorly and chose the furnishings tastefully. No, Max did not have some black columns, moldings, gilding, antique furniture, and other attributes of wealth. It was an ordinary loft with full wall windows, converted into an apartment from the studio of some Soviet artist. But everything was so tasteful and perfectly styled that it was breathtaking. Melanie was even afraid to breathe in this huge room. Do you like it? Max grinned as he escorted her into the living room. The soft lighting from the antique ceiling fixtures. I don't know. I've been a lot of places, but your place is fantastically beautiful. I never thought lofts could be so cozy. I called in a designer from Italy. He's some kind of hereditary architect and often works on the interiors of famous fashion houses. I don't want to brag. I don't really understand anything about it anyway. The main thing for me is that there was a place to sleep and the plaster didn't crumble. I used to think the dorm was the best place on earth. Melanie laughed. It's a great place to live, Max. I can tell you that. There's plenty of room for everyone. If you sit there in four walls, you'll have more fun. Are you serious now? Melanie frowned. What, are you hitting on me? Come on, Melanie. It's boring. It's not easy. And there's a woman's hand missing here. I can feel it right away. What do you call me? A housekeeper? I'd laugh. The woman snorted. No way. And I have a housekeeper. That's not what I mean. When a woman lives in a house, you can smell it. Even the atmosphere is different. I'm used to Naomi always being home. Now I just can't get used to it. It seems to me that the process of adaptation will go faster if we cope with all this together. Melanie thought for a moment. I don't know. I can get bored alone, of course, but I don't really feel Edward's absence. Melanie's expression was wry. She was acutely aware that everything at home wasn't the same. The couch was no longer cozy, the kitchen floor no longer warm, the air no longer fresh. And the silence. The silence. A sepulchral silence greeted her every evening after work. Melanie had seriously considered getting a cat, but she was afraid he'd be sad alone all day, so she procrastinated. Melanie also missed Edward, especially after they'd met at the cottage. 20 years of living together couldn't go to waste, after all. Melanie was even ready to forgive her husband. Edward had repented quite sincerely. But Max, as if sensing this, tried to distract the woman as much as possible from thoughts of Edward. Melanie, am I serious? Think about it. Everything in your apartment reminds you of your husband. You should be looking forward, not backward. It's better to look back, try to forget. I, for example, didn't even think about it. I moved right in. Naomi and I built this place for us. We thought we'd have a big family. If I'd stayed in the old house, I'd have gone crazy. This is all new. Nothing reminds you of the past. It's a lot of space on your own, but you get used to it. Then why did you call me if you're already used to being alone? Melanie, I'm telling you, I'm just trying to help. I can see you're hurting, just as a friend. I just want you to breathe more quickly. Besides, it's not like I'm suggesting you move here for good. If you don't like it, you can always leave. Oh, I don't know, Melanie frowned. It's kind of sudden, to be honest. It's weird. She promised to at least think about Max's offer. Okay, Melanie grinned. Are you trying to drive me crazy? I'll think about it, but I won't promise anything. It's a deal. Now, since you invited me, give me a tour. I need to know where I'm potentially going to live. Now that's something else. Max immediately got to work and began to take Melanie around the apartment. On the first floor, there was a huge living room combined with the kitchen and dining room. In fact, the entire space was unified, and one area flowed seamlessly into the other. There was also a guest bedroom, a spacious bathroom, and a storage room. On the second floor were 2 more bedrooms, a gym, an office, and a couple of other rooms that Max hadn't shown yet. What's in there? Melanie wondered when the inspection was over, in front of the closed door. There's nothing to see. He hadn't even done the repairs. We were planning to make children's rooms, Max continued. But one room could of course be made for the servants. You might want a maid to clean the place, or a cook to live here. You're a bourgeois, Peter. Melanie laughed. A maid. Though it takes a lot of effort and money to maintain a place like this. Well, shall we have tea? It's evening. Let's have some wine. I've got a whole wine cabinet in the kitchen, and some very good ones. There's wine? Melanie hesitated. I don't know, I have to work tomorrow. Is that it? Don't worry, we won't get drunk, we'll just have a glass. I'll take you in the morning. Where to? I was actually planning on going home tonight. What's the matter with the 7 of us? Stay. You can have the guest bedroom all to yourself. It's got a bed like that, Melanie. How would you sleep on a cloud? It'll give you a chance to test it out before you decide to move. Oh, Peter, you're so persistent, I can't believe it. All right, I'll do it. Besides, it's closer to work from here. But I don't even have anything to change into. There's a lot of clothes in here. Is this your wife's new stuff? No, I made pajamas just for you. You can wear what you're wearing to work. It's a very nice suit. You never leave the office anyway. Okay. It's a deal. Why don't you buy me some of your wine? Melanie had been living in Max's apartment for 2 months, and she loved it. It was very convenient to get to work from here. She didn't even have to drive, just a block away. And there it was, the office. And she didn't have to think about cooking and cleaning. The housekeeper would take care of everything. Max was behaving himself. He still made explicit comments about his guest, but he kept his hands to himself. Thank you for that. In mid-November, Max was preparing to leave again. He even called Melanie with him, because the trip promised to be interesting to Baikal. The woman seriously thought to agree, still a change of scenery. But the time of year wasn't quite right. And she had a lot of work to do. In the end, Melanie stayed at home. Max left on Friday. Melanie had the whole weekend to herself. Early Saturday morning, the housekeeper came. Melanie didn't usually socialize with this stern woman of indeterminate age who asked to be called Ariadne. Ariadne usually worked during the day when Melanie herself was at work, so they rarely crossed paths. It was mostly Max who socialized with her. But this morning Melanie was bored. She woke up as Ariadne was busily preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Good morning, Melanie, Ariadne said as she sat down at the table. Good morning, Melanie Nikolaevna. Ariadne replied in a muffled bass. Melanie even shuddered. What can I prepare for you? I'm the guardian of the pancakes. Max said that you like them very much. I wonder how he knows. Yeah, I did when I was younger, but then I started watching my figure. The last time he and I had pancakes was in the cafeteria at the college cafeteria. He remembers everything. Tea or coffee? Ariadne interrupted her memories. Oh, if I may, tea. I don't like to drink strong black coffee on weekends. Sugar, lemon. Why, Ariadne? I can put everything in my tea myself. It's just my job, Melanie Nikolaevna. Don't take offense. I'm not offended. I'm just not used to it. Like Peter, I'm not used to having other people do everything for me. Yes? Ariadne stretched out thoughtfully. Max has always been like that, as long as I've known him. I wonder, Melanie thought, how long she's known him. I was told he hired this woman when he moved out here from his wife. That's no more than 3 months. Maybe they knew each other before that. How long have you known Max? Melanie blurted out, unintentionally. About 10 years since he started making millions. That's how he hired me. I used to work in his country house and live there. And last year we moved here, and he even bought me a small apartment nearby. I scolded him so much. But how can you argue with a man like that? Said Ariadne. So he's been living here for a year. Melanie was surprised. I was told he'd just recently moved in. Ariadne even took her eyes off the frying pan. And the wife. His wife, Rachel, has been gone for years. Max was suffering so much, going crazy in his mansion. We took it all out on him. Didn't he tell you? No, go on, Melanie nodded. You see, Max tells me a lot of things, but not everything. I guess his heart doesn't allow it. I want to know him better. You, Melanie Nikolaevna, are a good woman. I immediately noticed how Max became cheerful when he started talking to you. You're a good influence on him. He usually goes to work with his head. Even the food, it's all the same flavor, whether you try or not. Naomi, how long have you been pulling him out of this lethargy? It's horrible. Melanie got worried. Naomi? Well, yes, his sister, you probably know her. She's a tall girl with wavy brown hair, thin. Melanie tensed, trying to conjure up the image of Edward's mistress. I've just seen her around. We don't know each other personally? Yes, that's the one. She doesn't eat anything. I don't know what to make her happy. Do you cook for her? What are you going to do with those silly kids? I used to know the Frasers' mother. I watched Max and Naomi grow up. I was a teenager then. We lived next door to each other. My mom used to help Olivia Pavlovna around the house. So I followed in her footsteps. Wait, where does Naomi live? She has an apartment on the waterfront. It's the one with the turrets, right under the roof. I usually go to her place in the evening, clean up, cook for 2 days, and she still forgets to eat. Max gets very angry. He loves his sister to bits. So that's it. Melanie muttered. She suddenly asked, Ariadne, tell me only without pretending. Do you love Max? Melanie frowned a strange question. Actually, we're friends. We've known each other since we were young, Melanie said. And then I had some family drama. Peter was there for me. But something doesn't add up in this story. What story? Ariadne tensed and immediately sat down on the chair next to Melanie. Melanie looked at the woman carefully. Since she had been working for Peter for 10 years, she should know a lot. But it was dangerous to trust her. How easily could she tell her master everything? It seems to me, Melanie continued, sighing, that Max has romantic feelings for me. And I'm completely confused, My husband cheated on me. And Peter and I met right after that, and he was very supportive, even invited me to live here so I could get used to my new life. But how could I say no to an old friend? Especially since we used to be very close. Strange, Ariadne said, as if she suspected something. Yes, and strange. It can't be a coincidence. Though I believe in fate. Back then, a long time ago, Peter was actively courting me. And I really liked him. But the boxing match decided everything, and I chose someone else. And it turns out I was wrong 20 years ago, because now I realize that I care about Peter deeply. A satisfied smile spread across Ariadne's face. She got up from her chair and patted Melanie on the shoulder. Don't worry, Melanie Nikolaevna. Max is a reliable man, and the fact that everything seems random, so it happens. We just don't see the whole picture. In the evening, when Ariadne left, Melanie sat and thought about Naomi. So this girl is not Peter's wife at all, but his sister. Melanie frowned. Yes, I remember when I was a student, he'd left a couple of times to take her somewhere, to pick her up. She was very young then, about 10 years old, no more. It's weird I didn't even remember my sister. But that's okay. Another thing, Melanie continued. Peter's wife died a few years ago. What's going on? Why would he pass his sister off as his wife? He's been making up stories. But more interestingly, what's Edward got to do with it? And where's Naomi gone? Or rather, why did she stop responding to Edward? This all looks very suspicious. I think I'm going to call Jessica. She must know something. Melanie dialed the private investigator's number immediately. She didn't answer for a long time, but finally her voice rang out. "Melanie, to what do I owe at this late hour?" Jessica wondered. "Oh, I'm sorry." Melanie realized that the hands on the clock were past. "I completely lost track of time. But it's very urgent. It can't wait until tomorrow." "Jessica, you're the only one who can help. I need to get to the bottom of this." "Oh, okay. Let me close the door so I don't wake my husband." Melanie was surprised that Jessica was married. This woman looked so confident and self-sufficient that it would be hard to imagine any man with her. "So, Melanie Nikolaevna, what's the emergency?" Jessica asked. Melanie sighed. "I will ask straight to the forehead, and no excuses about the secrecy of non-disclosure of information do not accept." She laughed. "Given the circumstances, it's something involving my client. Yes, that would be Max Skvortsov. So I see he did get in touch with you." "Not just out," Melanie sighed deeply. "I'm staying with him." "How?" The woman was stunned. "Really? He's fast. He just broke up with his wife, and he hit on the wife of his abuser. He did." "It's not that simple, Jessica. Can I be honest with you? Can I come to you as a client? In that case, would I have access to information from a previous investigation?" "Only if it directly relates to your case." "Yes, it does. But why don't you let me come down tomorrow and we'll draw up a contract?" "Why don't you do that? I'll text you the office address. Would 11 o'clock be convenient?" "Yeah, that's fine." The next morning, Linda raced to Jessica's office. The detective was waiting for her in her office. "So tell me," the woman stared at Linda. "Tell me, are you aware that Naomi, the girl in the photo, is not Max Skvortsov's wife?" Linda asked. "What do you mean?" The surprise on Jessica's face seemed genuine. "And tell me you didn't even know?" Linda laughed. "No, all the information on the client was given in a very metered way. That's what happens when the customer is a Skvortsov-type figure. He outlined everything to me, asked me to follow this woman, shoot, and so on. Digging into her past was not my job. I always follow instructions clearly. Reputation, is more important. I found out that Max's wife died a few years ago, and that girl Naomi is his little sister." "That's news." Jessica whistled. "Linda, it turns out that the situation is not as simple as it may seem. But why did Skvortsov mislead me? That's what I want to find out. You see, we've known each other since we were young. We went to school together. But then, how should I put it? Well, he was courting me in college. I liked Max, but I wasn't really interested in boys. I was studying hard. And then I met Edward. He started courting me right away. He and Max had a conflict over it. Although they were even friends at the time, and they were both boxing at the time. Edward won me back. Max and I pretty much stopped talking. And then I transferred to a correspondence school. I got married. And then I forgot all about it." "So much for motive," Jessica glared triumphantly. "God be with you. What motive? It's been so long, and there'd be something to remember. Men are very vulnerable. They can remember an insult for years, even decades. And if he loved you, he could have been plotting revenge on Edward for years. And he subconsciously wanted revenge even when his wife died. Something could have clicked in his head. That's when he went into action," Linda said. "Maybe he saw you two together somewhere or something." "So you're saying that Max deliberately set this whole thing up?" Jessica shook her head. "I'm not saying anything. It's too early to tell. But we can check it out." "Where is he now?" "He went to Phoenix. He won't be back for 4 days. Naomi is, according to the housekeeper, living in a tower house on the waterfront. Edward also told me that she hasn't returned his calls since I kicked him out the door." "That's interesting. All right, let's check it out." "All right, I'll get to work today. And tell me what the housekeeper said. How did you get her to have this conversation?" "I just saw this woman. Ariadne, if I'm not mistaken, looks like a guard dog. Yeah, we just happened to be talking. She asked me if I had feelings for Max. And also her question seemed very strange, and I put it all in a joke, even not in a joke, but I avoided a direct answer. She's been in the family a long time. She's bound to tell the boss. Yeah, I don't think we should trust her. I don't like this whole situation. How come you're living with him now? I talked him into it. He said it's hard for both of us, and that it'll be easier for us to cope together. Only I realize it's not as hard for him as it is for me. Yeah, obviously. Be careful with Ariadne. Don't say anything or give away your suspicions about Skvortsov. I'll call you as soon as I have any information. Do we have a deal? Linda nodded. I'll be in touch. And went outside. It was raining. The car was parked quite far away, and the woman had to get a little wet. Already sitting in the cabin, she suddenly thought of the locked rooms in Max's apartment. Once again, curiosity got the better of her. Linda hurried home, not knowing if Ariadne would be there. She wasn't expecting her housekeeper today, but she could come whenever she wanted. Who knows if Max asked her to watch Melanie, Linda thought. The house was quiet. Melanie called out the housekeeper's name several times, but there was no answer, only an echo. Then Melanie ran up the stairs. Her intuition told her that there was something in these rooms, but she needed to get inside. She pulled the knob. The doors to both rooms were locked with standard door locks, but the keys to the adjoining bedroom didn't fit. Melanie scrutinized the mechanism and figured out what she could use to open it. She searched the kitchen drawers for something thin and sharp. An ice pick, some kind of screwdriver, and meat forks were her choices. With trembling hands, Melanie tried to pick the lock. The mechanism would not budge. In desperation, she struck the handle of the screwdriver with all her might. There was a click. The handle slid smoothly down and a gap appeared between the door and the jamb. Bingo. Melanie almost screamed with joy. And immediately she entered the room. It was pitch black inside. Melanie tried to find the light switch, but it was nowhere to be found. When her eyes became accustomed to the darkness, she reached the window and pulled the thick curtains. The room was completely empty. Damn, Melanie muttered resentfully. Why lock it then? And the other one was the same. Probably here too, but the renovations aren't finished yet, are they? No, it can't be. My intuition has never failed me. Melanie went out and immediately started picking the lock on the second door. It worked faster this time. The latch clicked. She entered the room and went straight to the window, but on the way she hit her foot on something. The woman grabbed the bruised area and dropped the phone. The phone clattered to the concrete floor. Snapping out of her self-pity, Melanie still made her way to the window. Instead of drapes, dense rolls of curtains covered the glass. She had to look for a lifting chain, but there was none. So the woman manually lifted the fabric and turned around. The curtain immediately fell out of her hands, and the room was plunged back into darkness. What the hell is going on in here? Melanie whispered, trying to lift the curtain again. This time she secured it by the window handle. Light streamed through the window, revealing itself to Melanie. The walls were covered with pictures. The nearsighted woman did not immediately realize that all of the pictures showed her at different times in her life. Some had Edward or Ashley next to her. Melanie walked up to one of the walls and noticed something that looked like an altar at the bottom. On a small table were some candles, or rather floating candles, and dried chamomile flowers, her favorite. And there was a framed photograph. From it, Melanie was looking at a woman like 2 drops of water, similar to her, but different. Melanie took the picture to get a better look at it and immediately felt a sharp pain. Something heavy descended on her head. The next moment she was unconscious. Melanie woke up with pain all over her body. She tried to get up but couldn't. She could only lift her head. Her hands and feet were bound tightly, and she was lying on the bed in the master bedroom. "Are you awake?" Melanie heard Ariadne's familiar voice. "What's going on? Why did you tie me up?" Curiosity killed the cat. The housekeeper laughed hoarsely. "You shouldn't have gone there. Everything was fine." "What was? Why are my pictures there? Are you with Peter?" "I am." "Melanie, don't jump to conclusions. You've misinterpreted everything. Let me go right now." "No way. I can't make decisions like that. When Max gets back, he'll untie you himself. He's the one who asked me to suspend your mobility. What's this all about? You still don't get it, do you? But nothing. Who is that woman in the framed photo? She looks just like me. That's the late Rachel. You were right to point out that it seems Max was looking for a wife to remind him of his true love. What the hell are you talking about, Ariadne? Be a human being. You realize you're committing a crime, Melanie said. Don't make it worse. Scream all you want. It's so noiseless in here, you'll only ruin your voice. Besides, no one knows you're here, and they won't come to help you. I have to go to the bathroom. I see 2 doors. Do you know where the front door is? I'm telling you, you can't run anywhere, and you can't get your hands free. Don't even try, you'll only damage your skin. Sit tight. I'll bring you something to eat later. Ariadne untied Melanie's legs. She immediately tried to kick her probation worker, but was immediately knocked to the floor. Don't be silly, Melanie. Ariadne growled threateningly. You can't handle me. Don't even try. If you misbehave, I'll punish you. I have the authority to do that. The housekeeper gave Melanie an angry look in the eye and left the bedroom, locking the door behind her. Melanie felt completely helpless. Her hands were securely and professionally tied behind her back. After the meal Ariadne had brought, Melanie had a strong urge to sleep. She literally passed out. How long her sleep lasted was hard to say, but the woman woke up when she felt someone intensely shaking her by the shoulders and slapping her cheeks. Melanie, wake up, wake up. She heard a disembodied voice. Her husband's face appeared through the veil before her eyes. Edward, Melanie mumbled, trying to open her eyes. Why are you screaming like that? I had such a nightmare. She's alive. Edward shouted happily to someone. At once, some people were running around Melanie. They gave her a sniff of ammonia, and her consciousness cleared immediately. Jesus, she shuddered, rubbing her rope-scarred wrists. The welts made it clear that the ropes weren't part of the dream. What's going on? Melanie asked. Are you all right? Edward said worriedly. If it hadn't been for Jessica, I don't know what would have happened. Jessica? Melanie's eyes widened in bewilderment. Yes, that woman saved you. She found out all about Peter, and when she couldn't reach you a few times, she realized what had happened. She dug up something. Yeah, he's literally obsessed with you. Naomi told me everything, Edward said. She was the one who gave us the keys to this apartment. Otherwise, Ariadne wouldn't have let us in. Jessica called me and a couple of other tough guys, but now she's going through the old channels to contact the police. Peter's been picked up in Phoenix for trying to kidnap you. But I think he and his money are going to get away with it. Let's get out of here before he turns it around. That Ariadne is a loyal soldier. She's ready to take the blame. But what is the meaning of all this? Melanie frowned. I don't understand. That's what it means. Peter held a grudge against you 20 years ago and spent his whole life trying to get revenge. But he wasn't going to break up with you. He was smart enough to destroy what you had first. He sent Ashley. He was blackmailing her, intimidating her. So she went along with it. She charmed me on purpose. I was a fool to fall for it. But that's not the point. He'd been working on it for a long time, meticulously watching every move. And it all worked out beautifully. And it would have kept going. Just when you got to the housekeeper's room, he thought you suspected something and called him right away. Oh, he's a bastard. Melanie burst into tears with resentment. She couldn't tell whether it was the carefully planned operation or her own naivete that had made her more angry. It looks like he's going to get away with this, she said. I'm not sure, Edward said. I'll get a good lawyer. Jessica already recommended one. They say he's a good one to try for another case. His ex-wife didn't leave the world willingly. He only married her because she looked like you. She found some old photos of you and started asking questions. That's when he went crazy. Ashley's intimidated by him. She's willing to testify against him. Naomi, too. She's been through a lot, too. I'm afraid she's only saying that for now. It's okay. You and I will go far away where he can't get to us, Melanie said. We will. I'm sorry, and I'll do my best not to disappoint you again. Let's go, Edward said. Melanie hugged her husband tightly. "Let's leave right now. I forgave you a long time ago, you fool. Do you really love me?" The man's face contorted with surprise. "Of course I love you. If you didn't love me, you would have divorced me." Edward took her in his arms and carried her out of the bedroom. He walked slowly down the stairs and headed for the exit. Melanie stared at her husband without taking her eyes off him. She didn't even notice the men in black tracksuits holding the bound housekeeper. Didn't notice Jessica shaking her head and smiling. Didn't notice anything. Her whole body went light. All she could see were the lights of the Capitol and Edward, his cheeks wet with tears. Found her under the fence, mother-in-law, kicked out pregnant daughter-in-law. But she couldn't have imagined such a thing. Lexi remembered perfectly well how her father had left the family, trying to take almost everything he could carry out of the apartment. She had come back rather late from her girlfriend's birthday party and almost fell down, tangled in a pile of appliances, things, for some reason stacked at the doorstep. The girl even thought that someone had broken into the apartment and wanted to jump out into the entrance. But she heard her parents' voices coming from the big room, which served as a bedroom and a hall for the reception of merry companies. Hurriedly pulling off her boots, hanging her jacket on the coat rack, and tossing her backpack, Lexi headed out to find out what was going on, and caught a strange and scary scene. Her parents were fighting as hard as they had ever fought before and didn't even pay her any attention when she peeked into the room. It was as if Lexi's daughter suddenly saw a total stranger instead of her adoring father, a violent, screaming man with a throbbing vein in his neck. It seemed as if this angry stranger was about to start destroying everything in the apartment, but instead he methodically walked around the room and collected things, not stopping to argue with his wife. "What makes you think I'm a horny deer? When were you ever going to tell me the truth? Never. Live, Eugene, wear horns, work and pay for everything. What made you so sure, Isabel, that I wasn't going anywhere? You thought I was a fool, so you stopped hiding your affairs. That's great. Don't think you're going to get away with this. If you file for alimony, you know I'll contest it. I'll have them do a forensic audit. I know now that all these years I've been raising a daughter who wasn't my own." Lexi froze on the threshold, shocked by such strange news. But her mom didn't look confused or hurt. If she had, she would have cried, claimed there had been a mistake, offered to double-check everything. But no. The woman responded just as aggressively to her husband. "Oh, Eugene, you make me laugh. He won't pay alimony. He's going to ask for a forensic test. Who are you going to hurt? Have you ever heard the saying about the father who raised the child? How are you going to explain to Lexi that she's nothing to you now? Won't you have a heart of hearts for her? You remember how much fun you two have playing together, skiing, even going fishing in the winter and summer. Are you going to forget all that? Throw it out of your head like garbage in a bucket. Good father." He forgot his daughter in no time. The man threw everything he had in his hands to the floor with rage and swung to hit his wife. But he held back and shouted, "How can I still treat her if she is a visible reminder of your sin? Isabel, you knew I wouldn't forgive adultery. Then why did you make me do it, even though there was a risk that it would come out? Raising someone else's child. What's inside? You couldn't wait for me to come back. I was traveling long distances for my family, trying to make more money so you wouldn't need anything. When Lexi was born, I worked even harder. What about a baby in the family? There's so much to do. I just don't know why I stayed up 24 hours a day sometimes. It turns out I didn't really have a family. Just a cheating wife and a kid that the nanny took out on the side. Eugene, I'm sorry, it was just a random episode. A moment of passion, nothing more. I've tried 100 times to explain it to you, but I was afraid you wouldn't understand." The man even found the strength to laugh. "I wonder if Isabel's a thing. I think I had a right to know the truth from the beginning. Then maybe it wouldn't be so painful now. I fought with my mom for you. It was like she could feel your lying nature in her heart." Eugene turned away from Isabel so she wouldn't see the tears in his eyes and noticed Lexi standing in the doorway. The man felt uneasy. He'd thought of this girl as his daughter for so many years that it was impossible to fall out of love with her overnight. "I'm sorry, Lexi," the man said, and began to gather up the things he had left behind. Then, waving his hand, he sat down on the couch. "Lexi." Mom didn't know what to say. The girl solved the problem herself. Walking up to the man, she lowered herself to the floor in front of him so she could look into his eyes and said quietly, "For me, you will forever remain the most real daddy. Just so you know, whenever you want to talk to me, I'll always be glad to." The man couldn't help himself. On impulse, he hugged the girl he had considered his daughter for 14 years and headed for the exit. Lexi heard the head of the family rumbling something in the hallway, but she didn't go out. To the girl in general, this situation seemed like some kind of strange, sticky nightmare. Only when the front door slammed, she dared to ask, "Mom, how come? Why did Daddy think I wasn't his own daughter?" Isabel, from whom the subtle odor of booze emanated, did not lie. "Oh, but it's embarrassing to tell your own daughter that. But you're an adult, so listen, if only so you don't make the same mistakes I did. I married Eugene when I was 18 years old. He'd already been in the army, got a job as a delivery driver. He brought goods to the store where my mother, your grandmother, ran the store, and he saw me. Anyway, he started courting me. But his mother and my mother, of course, were against it. They thought we weren't a couple at all. My mother said I'd die of boredom with a village level. She said that he can only talk about the quality of manure, and with him even in the movies will be ashamed to go to the movies, not to mention the theater. But you remember your grandmother, Lexi, you should remember your grandmother. You were 10 years old when she left. Do you remember how she wasn't shy with her words?" A confused Lexi nodded. The grandmother she was named after, she remembered. She was always on parade, but she could express herself in such a way that there was nothing left to say. Isabel took a breath and continued to share the family secret with her daughter. "My mother-in-law, who, like my mother, also single-handedly raised a child, was not shy in expressions. Directly in my eyes called me a city slut. She declared that she would not give her blessing for her son's marriage to a slacker. But who would listen to the young people then? We got married, and of course I went to the village for 80 days. And then I settled down in this city apartment. We lived well, at least at first. Then money became scarce. My mother refused to help with finances. You do it yourself, children yourself, since you already consider yourself so mature that you got married. Friends advised Eugene that trucking was more profitable, and he started traveling. The money did get better, but I got bored. So I decided to go to my high school reunion to get some compliments. A guy who'd been courting me since high school just turned my head. Kind of made up for lost time. I'm not saying I resisted. Certainly had no reason to be proud of myself. It just so happens you're not really Eugene's daughter. Your real biological father, by the way, found out from me that you were born, but by then he was getting married and didn't want to change anything in his life. So I had to keep lying. My mother-in-law, as soon as she saw you tiny, started saying that you were not from their family. She only came to visit a few times, and all the time she frowned as if she had eaten a lemon without sugar, so disgusting to look at. She never invited us to vacation. My mother-in-law couldn't know for sure that I had deceived her son, but she was convinced of it. And she didn't need proof. I'm sure she kept telling Eugene you weren't his daughter. Yes, she must have planted doubts in his mind, even though it took years. But today, Eugene, your father, has changed. I mean, not really, but, well, Eugene started making complaints about me for not doing my chores around the house, for coming home from work drunk. He said I was setting a bad example for you, his daughter. In general, in the heat of the moment, I couldn't stand it. I blurted out everything that I had kept secret for a long time. Blurted out that you are not his daughter at all. So stupidly, with my own tongue, I destroyed the delicate balance. Lexi didn't know what to do. She was drawn to her father. And paradoxically, she felt sorry for her mother. And it also hurt like crazy that her familiar world was crumbling. Lexi's class was made up of students from single-parent families. They seemed to try to pretend that they didn't care about having a mom and dad together. But Lexi still caught the occasional hint of jealousy. Lexi was genuinely happy, thinking her parents were quite happy. Up until this evening, her family had seemed like a safe haven. And now it appeared there was no idyll. It was all a sham. Lexi's good mood as she crossed the threshold of her home was gone. A vague and therefore even more frightening prospect loomed ahead. Before the court hearing where Lexi was to be asked which parent she wanted to stay with, Eugene approached her. He didn't look the girl in the eye and said, "I now, when not on the road, I live at my mom's place in the village. It's cheaper and more convenient. On the payment of alimony, I will not object, but take you to me cannot. Especially you know the whole truth, and I'm afraid with my mom you will not find common ground. I raised you, and you're a complete stranger to her." So Eugene asked the court to let Lexi live with her mom. Lexi got mad and screamed, uninhibited. "Fuck you and your alimony. And that crazy grandma I don't even remember, fuck you. I don't need anything from you, I'll do without." Isabel, who was talking to an acquaintance, jumped up to her daughter and almost ex-husband and pulled the furious Lexi away from Eugene. The girl was sobbing. "Let's live without his help. I don't want to see him anymore, since he's so determined to eliminate me from his life." The divorce proceedings of Isabel and Eugene did not take long. The court made all the proper rulings, and the couple began a new phase of their lives. It would seem in the schedule of strong changes have not changed, because the head of the family for a long time was not at home. But the situation became something nervous. Isabel, like many women after the fateful changes, made a new haircut, began to pay special attention to her appearance. Of course, Lexi wanted her mom to be happy, even if it meant the breakup of a seemingly prosperous family. Of course, the dubious credit didn't belong to Eugene at all. At any rate, Lexi didn't blame her mom. And she reacted quite tolerantly to the news, which came less than a year after the final point in the family's unhappy history. "Anyway, daughter, we're having guests over tonight, Stephen, who's a friend of mine, and his son Kieran. I have 2 requests of you. First, I'd like you to help me clean up. Secondly, I want you to make a good impression on our guests. So dress tastefully, well, not flashy." Since that hopelessly ruined Saturday, Lexi had been in a constant stream of trouble. Isabel was literally spilling out in front of the guests, offering to taste the salad or the roasted meat. Stephen's bartending, who presented the landlady with 2 measly bouquets of 3 tulips, each looking like it was at least 1,000,000 scarlet roses, infuriated Lexi. Even more antipathetic to Lexi was Stephen's son Kieran. He was only a year older than Lexi and proudly announced to the crowd that he had no intention of wasting time in school and would apply to college after 9th grade. Stephen nodded contentedly as he listened to his son. Isabel, who always told her daughter to get higher education, also approved of this decision, but at the same time she asked worriedly, "Well done, Kieran. But probably in the College of Deferment from the Army is not." The guy grinned. "So I don't need it. I have chronic flat feet, just like my dad." In the middle of the evening, Stephen proposed, and Lexi was miffed that her mom hadn't even consulted her, but had said yes right away. He clinked his juice glass with his fiancée and then started shouting, bitter. Like a fool. Lexi probably would have had an easier time accepting the next change if her mom and Stephen hadn't decided to move into the bride's spacious apartment and rent out the groom's place. When the guests, to the girl's relief, left, Lexi, clearing the table, asked her mom, "I just don't understand why your fiancé and his son decided to live with us if they have their own apartment. I'm happy to squeeze for the sake of strangers." Isabel was indignant. "No one will squeeze you. Kieran will live in the other room. Your nursery will still be your room and my room will still be mine." Lexi tried to explain her point of view. "It's still like a dorm. I don't think it's right. I can't even walk around half naked in my own house in the heat. It's a downer. If you want my opinion, I think it would be perfect if this Stephen of yours invited you to live with him. I can manage the housekeeping here without a problem." Isabel was adamant, and then she confessed. "We're going to need money soon, so we're going to have to rent the place out. I'm expecting Stephen's baby." Lexi understood that her mother, quite still a young 34-year-old woman, and such a scenario was quite predictable. However, the prospect of not only seeing a strange man and an unsympathetic guy all the time, but also becoming a babysitter loomed. This destroyed at the root of all the joy of the fact that the parent found her happiness. Stephen, unlike the man Lexi had long considered a father, didn't bother to work at all and mostly lay on the couch. Kieran, to the girl's great joy, did not flicker in front of her eyes for very long. One day he simply gathered his things in a bag and, asking his father for money, said, "Anyway, I'm moving in with a friend. She and I are kind of on good terms. Besides, her parents went abroad and from her house to college is a 3-minute walk. Okay, have fun. I'll send you money." "Just kidding. I'll come to you for financial support." Isabel tried to protest, reminding her stepson that he had just turned 16, but he smirked and said, "Isabel, you should be jumping for joy that I'm moving out, not playing the caring hen." Besides, he nodded at his stepmother's visible belly. "You'll soon have noise, screams, and the stench of maggots. What the hell do I need that kind of happiness for?" Stephen didn't scold for his rather brazen treatment of his stepmother. He took the money out of his wallet and, handing it to his son, grumbled angrily, "That's it. Go on, get out of here. We are going to reason here. He's a philosopher. He himself has long since left the larva stage. And what are you now according to your classification? A man. A mystery." He continued, making Lexi even more disgusted. But Kieran didn't seem to be used to such jokes. He took the bills held out to him and, picking up his bag, walked away. Lexi had a half-sister, Maggie, on the eve of the millennium, when the whole world was preparing for the millennium. And there was a serious discussion on TV about the year 2000 and possible computer hardware failures. So New Year's Eve spent with friends was pretty much the last island of calm of the period after Lexi's parents divorced. She cheered, sang songs, and desperately hoped that the gloomy premonitions wouldn't come true. However, things were turning out to be even worse than she could have predicted. For more than 3 years, since her mom had brought Maggie's youngest daughter's bundle home from the hospital, her oldest daughter, Lexi, had been getting the brunt of it. Lexi was the one who most often changed her sister's soiled diapers and diapers, threw laundry in the wash, hung it up, unfolded it, and so on in an endless circle. Stephen looked at his stepdaughter from the couch and chuckled, turning to his wife. "Isabel, you're a good girl. You're a young woman to have a baby. First you got a nanny, and then a cradle." Even preparation for exams was not considered a valid reason for not doing some of the housework. Only once, when Lexi's fever was over 39 degrees, was she graciously allowed to be treated. Isabel now sided with Stephen in every argument. With her tacit consent, her stepson could take any item he liked from the house or ask for any amount of money, even without a promise to give it back. And for Lexi to buy anything for herself outside of her own means was out of the question. Her mother-in-law, Janie Swan, treated Lexi like a waste of space or a servant, and when she visited, she never brought the girl an apple. Though she did bring her adult grandson, Kieran, despite the fact that he lived apart from his own grandson, early fruit and sweets in bags. Stephen would then pick up the goodies intended for Kieran and take them to his girlfriend's apartment. Simple-minded Maggie, who had seen Lexi around her more often than her mother since she was a baby, treated her little sister to the gifts she had received. Only the girl did not have the conscience to offend the child. Under such conditions, Lexi considered entering the teacher training college on the budget as the real miracle and made every effort not to be expelled. However, it became more and more difficult. Another morning in the family began with a scandal. Isabel shouted that it was time to get up and take her daughter to daycare. Lexi sluggishly resisted. "Mommy, but I can't today, I'm exhausted." To ask that Stephen for once his own, by the way, his daughter took. "I did the dishes again yesterday after everyone else. I didn't get my essay typed up until 4 this morning. I have a second period today, so I can sleep in instead of dragging myself through the nasty weather to this equally nasty daycare." Lexi wanted to add that she hadn't actually asked her mom to give birth to Maggie, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't the girl's fault that the main care about her was dumped on her older sister. Even without that phrase, however, a quarrel had broken out. Isabel shouted in unison with Stephen that she, Lexi, was completely ungrateful and did not remember any good at all. "By the way, I'm the one who feeds and sings you, you slacker. She's learning to work her ass off," Stephen grumbled. There was nothing unusual in these reproaches, though. Perhaps if Lexi wasn't so tired, she would have kept quiet, as she often did. But it all came together. Her studies, her part-time job, the household chores the rest of her family generously placed on her, the annoyance of a strange man invading her apartment, and the lack of sleep all combined to form a potent mix. Lexi dozed off in her tracksuit, then jumped up and stood in front of Stephen and began to say what she had to say. "I don't see your highness doing anything at all. Your mom does all the work, and I get a lot of work too. I love Maggie very much, but it's time you did something for your daughter, Stephen." "Who are you?" Stephen exclaimed. Lexi instinctively ducked, noticing the palm of her stepfather's hand flying in her direction, deciding to slap her back. After getting past her mom and running out of the room, Lexi found Kieran in the hallway. The boy was just taking off his shoes and muttered a greeting. "Let's eat. I haven't eaten since yesterday lunch. Laura gave me a hard time and wouldn't even let me come home." Isabel yelled that it was time to get up and take my daughter to daycare. Lexi fought back. "Mom, but I can't today. I'm exhausted." To ask that Stephen for once his own, by the way, the daughter took. "I did the dishes again yesterday after everyone else. I didn't get my essay typed up until 4 this morning. I have a second period today so I can sleep in instead of dragging myself through the nasty weather to this equally nasty daycare." Lexi wanted to add that she hadn't actually asked her mom to give birth to Maggie, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't the girl's fault that the main care about her was dumped on her older sister. Even without that phrase, however, a quarrel had broken out. Isabel shouted in unison with Stephen that she, Lexi, was completely ungrateful and did not remember any good at all. "By the way, I'm the one who feeds and sings you, you slacker." "She's learning to work her ass off," Stephen grumbled. There was nothing unusual in these reproaches, though. Perhaps if Lexi hadn't been so tired, she would have kept quiet, as she often did. But it all came together. Her studies, her part-time job, the household chores the rest of her family generously placed on her, the annoyance of a strange man invading her apartment, and the lack of sleep all combined to form a potent mix. Lexi dozed off in her tracksuit, then jumped up and stood in front of Stephen and began to say everything she had accumulated. "I don't see your highness doing anything. Your mom does all the work, and I get a lot of work too. I love Maggie very much, but it's time you did something for your daughter, Stephen." "Who are you?" Stephen exclaimed. Lexi instinctively ducked, noticing the palm of her stepfather's hand flying in her direction, deciding to slap her back. After getting past her mom and running out of the room, Lexi found Kieran in the hallway. The boy was just taking off his shoes and muttered a greeting. "Let's eat. I haven't eaten since lunch yesterday. Laura gave me a hard time and wouldn't even let me come home. Isabel was yelling at me to get up and take Maggie to daycare." Lexi fought back sluggishly. It had been over a year since she'd seen Eugene. Their last phone conversation had been crumpled. It seemed Eugene was trying to cope with a personal tragedy by overworking himself beyond measure. Lexi's attempts to call him had been unsuccessful, and there were no replies to messages sent. "I guess my mom is keeping quiet about the mystery of my birth because of my lover," Lexi thought. "And everything would have been fine up until now. Now I have to suffer through an old mom's sin." As expected, the apartment was rearranged that evening when Maggie's crib was brought in. Lexi's already small room was cramped, but there was no other option. She flatly refused to stay in the pass-through room, which caused a scornful remark from Kieran. "Oh, you'd think someone would be looking at you." The guy was clearly being sly, though. Lexi noticed that he didn't miss the opportunity to stare at her unhindered. Since Kieran had moved in, things had gotten worse. When no one was around to see, he made lewd suggestions to his stepsister, though he reduced them to jokes afterward. He pinched the girl, slapped her ass, and laughed in her face, noticing the consternation in Lexi's eyes. She repeatedly complained to her mother. The latter promised to deal with her stepson, but the conversations had no positive effect. Kieran didn't put Isabel in any way, and, making round eyes, presented the situation as if it was Lexi who was hitting on him, not him. Stephen, who had been advised by his stepdaughter to rein in his son, stood up for him. "And you, too, don't play the innocent part in front of Kieran. There's no place for a modern girl to try out." Lexi realized that there would be no help from her mother, and even less from her insolent husband. Sometimes Kieran would go away for a few days. Only then did Lexi sigh in relative peace. One summer morning, Isabel had taken Maggie to daycare early so her oldest daughter could sleep in a little longer, building up her strength for her last exam. Lexi rejoiced in vain at this good fortune, however, because as she was taking a shower, Kieran opened the bathroom door in the most unceremonious manner, ripping out a lock of hair on one side. Smirking, Kieran stated to the half-sister hiding behind the translucent curtain. "Hear me out, cutie. Or shall we start with me rubbing your back?" Grabbing the first vial from the shelf, the girl threw it at the insolent man. It was unlikely to scare him off, but someone rang demandingly at the apartment door, and Kieran muttered, "You've interrupted me at the most interesting point. I'm going to go see who's here." Lexi, horrified, hurriedly threw on her robe and ran to her room to get dressed. What was outside the door didn't inspire confidence in the girl. Dressing quickly, she pulled a pepper spray out of her backpack, determined to use it without any warning if Kieran got in her way. Without even combing her hair, she began to make her way to the exit. Fortunately, she didn't run into her half-brother. From the sound of water running, he was in the bathroom. The girl was furious. She was running out of patience. Of course, she could change the lock to a stronger one, but she realized that it would not solve the main problem. She was defenseless against Kieran, who did whatever he wanted. She wasn't going to be a victim, so she planned a serious conversation for tonight. Having passed the last difficult exam scheduled for that day, even better than one could expect after the stress of the morning, and thus closing the summer session, Lexi was glad that at least this problem was over. As agreed, the girl picked Maggie up at the daycare center, and on the way home she pondered how to start a conversation with all the residents of the apartment. She didn't want her little sister to witness the scandal. But it was possible to send her to the nursery to watch cartoons. What child would refuse? In the meantime, she would raise the central issue that having Kieran living in the apartment was in no way acceptable. After Maggie rushed off to the nursery after dinner, Lexi asked to stay in the kitchen for Stephen, who was about to go to his favorite couch by the TV. Kieran clearly didn't expect Lexi to dare tell him about his morning prank. He immediately started making excuses. "I didn't realize the bathroom was occupied." It was obvious he was lying, and the girl blushed with indignation. Oh, what an ignoramus. And the fact that the water was on and the bathroom door was closed from the inside didn't clue you into anything. What are you lying about? Lexi took a breath to calm down a bit, to keep her tone of voice even and not startle Maggie with a scream, and continued. "Anyway, Kieran, I can't stay under the same roof with you. Nothing good will come of it. With Mom and Stephen, you're still somehow playing the part of a decent person. But as soon as you and I are alone together, how do you act?" It was noticeable that Kieran was nervous, but trying to make excuses for himself. "Ugh, you're so serious. I was just trying to make a joke. So what if you're pretty? Do you even look at yourself in the mirror? There will be no reaction to your lean appearance. A liter of water won't be enough to make me want to look at you." Her half-brother's hurtful taunts didn't hurt her, and she gave her mother an ultimatum. "You can't go on living like this. I'm very concerned about Kieran's behavior. Mom, either you kick him out or I'm leaving." Stephen had been silent until then, but now he cut into the conversation. "Then go. Get the hell out of here. You're provoking Kieran yourself. As the saying goes, if the dog won't do it, the purse won't do it. I don't need you accusing him of any wrongdoing. That snake is hungry. Get out to here. You don't need to be slinging mud at my son in the hutch." Lexi was hurt not so much by her stepfather's words, but by the fact that her mom hadn't even thought to defend her. Isabel was silent. She acted as if she'd talked to Stephen about it a long time ago and decided everything was not in her daughter's favor. "Mom, why aren't you saying anything? That you won't even say a word in defense of your daughter, who is now being insulted by your husband? Or do you also think I'm provoking this Kieran? Or is having a man in the house more important to you than what happens to your daughter? Even two? Maggie's in danger too. I don't know what that Kieran guy's got in his head. She's little, and she'll be easy for him to handle it all," Lexi pleaded. Stephen became enraged. "You cunt, keep your fucking mouth shut. If I ever hear that kind of suspicion about Kieran again, I'll have you out of the apartment in a heartbeat." Lexi was confused for a few moments at her stepfather's insolence. She couldn't find the right words. And then, trying not to shout, she asked, "Is it okay that this is my mom's apartment and I'm registered here? How am I going to get out of here? Maybe it's you and your difficult junior who will vacate the territory. Kieran should have been in the army a long time ago. But you did your best to get him out of it. And now that bum's overexerting himself, he's groping me. So I want him out of here before I smash his empty head in. When's he gonna pinch me again or make me dirty with his eyes? Let that precious one go to his own apartment that's for rent. Or eventually let him rent. Better yet. Both of you dreaming cowards out of here. Isabel didn't know how to extinguish the conflict that had erupted in the family. So she asked, "Let us all calm down, and tomorrow we'll solve everything calmly. The morning is wiser in the evening." Lexi was uncomfortable with her mom's attitude. But she was so tired of arguing and fighting for her right to live in safety that she didn't even argue, as her stepfather tried to order and went to bed. Her premonitions were grim. Judging by her mother's behavior, she wasn't going to chase any of the men away, so she would have to leave on her own. Okay, at least the session is behind us. You can, as an option, ask for somewhere in a children's camp, even if not a counselor, just as long as here, in the home apartment, where she no longer felt safe, not to stay. Sleep wasn't in either eye. When Lexi heard someone approach the room over the creak of the floors, the girl realized the person on the other side of the door was stomping around, apparently listening to see if the girls were asleep or not. The situation didn't seem to arouse any suspicion. The doorknob crept down and the girl could make out the silhouette of Kieran in the opening. He headed toward her bed and nearly jumped when Lexi's quiet voice sounded. "You make one more move in my direction, and I'll have the whole house ransacked. Will you have to explain what you're doing in a girl's bedroom?" He also whispered back, "Scared you? I'll think of something." The stepbrother was approaching, and Lexi didn't hesitate to yell. She yelled at full force, as if releasing her accumulated irritation and anger. The girl didn't care. Nothing was stopping her. "What's that roaring?" Maggie woke up. And the neighbor from downstairs, a not quite adequate bile man, banged on the radiator. Lexi didn't stop screaming even when her mother and stepfather appeared in the room. The girl was silent only when Kieran splashed a glass of water in her face, which stood on the nightstand of the youngest daughter. It didn't calm the girl, but it did silence her from the liquid that had entered her mouth. "Maggie, stand up for Lexi," the girl pleaded. "Lyra, something you said to Lexi about her selfishness, bad parenting." But the girl didn't care under that eerie cacophony. Lexi hurriedly gathered her things. "I'm not staying here a second longer. I highly doubt Kieran showed up here in the middle of the night to apologize. Anyway, Mom, I'm off and I expect you to pay for your share of this apartment, or get that creep completely out of my sight." Stephen glared at Kieran and his furious stepdaughter with clearly discernible anger and did not react to his sobbing daughter. Isabel, clutching her head, went to get her medication, reporting to nowhere. "God, what's the big deal about having a material dispute in the middle of the night? I need to take a sedative." Lexi crouched down next to Maggie, stroked her head, said goodbye, and passing the kitchen where her mom sat at the table, reminded her, "I'm expecting a call, and as soon as possible for the rest of your stuff I'll come back later. Hopefully everything will be safe." Lexi was shaking with anger, but she stubbornly walked toward the train station to go to the only person who could help her. In the waiting room, Lexi opened the secret notebook she thought her roommate had given her in 3rd or 4th grade. She found the entry she wanted among the pages: 11 Main Street, Maryberry Village, 11 Main Street. Janie Swan, a line that Eugene had written long ago, when Lexi still had what she thought was a strong, happy family, and said it was his mom's name and address. The man promised that one day they would all go to visit her to try to move past their former differences. Lexi oriented herself and bought a ticket to the station closest to this Holmesley. Based on the information, it would take a walk of about 4 kilometers. But that wasn't what was confusing Lexi. She strained to think about what to say to Janie Swan, how to introduce herself: your son's ex-daughter, your ex-daughter-in-law's daughter. Eugene's acquaintance, the one he'd long thought was his daughter. The girl pored over the options but couldn't find the perfect one. Getting to her destination, however, was a breeze. And soon Lexi was standing at the fence with a sign with the correct address attached to it. She didn't dare to introduce herself to the woman in the tracksuit who was weeding the front garden and, to all appearances, was Janie Swan. She simply asked, "Hi, can I see Eugene?" Lexi had no idea that a quite innocuous phrase could have such an effect. The woman threw herself to the ground and seemed to wriggle like a wounded animal. Lexi hesitated only for a few seconds before dropping her things, opening the wicket and running up to the woman. "Janie Swan, get up. Can I help you?" The elderly woman didn't immediately begin to calm down, and it wasn't until a few minutes later that Lexi was able to lift her off the ground and bring her to a bench under a tree. Janie Swan exhaled noisily, pulled a vial out of her pocket, and ordered, "From home, get me a mug of water and some pills from the fridge." Peering into the box, Lexi spotted the medicine for Stephen and a vial of valerian. She ran into the house, and after quickly finding all the medications she needed, she rushed to find the old lady. On the table she noticed a photo of Eugene with a black ribbon across it. She felt bitter to the point of tears and sobbed. Eugene was the only person she considered a father, and even though it was Kieran's fault that the relationship between the supposed relatives had been destroyed, Lexi still missed him. She now realized what had caused Janie Swan to react so violently and was completely at a loss as to how to explain who she was and why she had come, so as not to further tear the heart of the poor woman who had lost her son. After all, if it weren't for her complicated, unhappy family history, Lexi would need help. The girl brought pills and water to Janie Swan, and when she took the medicine, she asked, "Should we call the doctors?" Janie Swan shook her head. Then she brushed away a tear and wiped her eyes. She began to study the uninvited guest. The look of genuine regret in her grief-stricken eyes was suddenly prickly and angry. "Is this your fault with your slutty mom?" Poking Lexi painfully in the stomach, the woman slammed her fist on the ground and began to accuse. "You ruined my son, and you live happily yourself. You asshole, you're not even shy enough to come here to see me. If it wasn't for your shameless mother, you wouldn't have cheated my son. I know he'd be with some decent woman now, and everything would be different. I told him as soon as I saw you, a newborn, that Kieran was a scoundrel, trying to bind him to himself with someone else's child." Janichka didn't listen, and here's the result: he crashed his car, and it was as if he never existed. He didn't even leave me a granddaughter or a grandson, his own daughter. They buried him in the damp earth, that's all. There was Zhenya Gladyshev, and he's gone, just a grave left. Get out of my yard. Why did you come here? My eyes wouldn't have seen you." The woman, breathing heavily, got up from the bench and began to step on the guest, showering her with profanity. "You shameless bastard, you shameless mother. Get out before I take the sin on my soul. I'll maim you. I'm going to take my broom and beat you so hard you'll be dead." Lexi mumbled an apology, which Janie Swan didn't even seem to hear, and ran out of the yard, picking up the things that had been left by the fence. The girl decided to visit Eugene's last shelter. She couldn't see him as a stranger after all. She had seen where the cemetery was when she went to the Gladyshev's house, and it was not difficult to find the grave of the son of that mistress who was angry with her. A simple cross with a photograph and a plaque with 2 dates. That was all that was left of Eugene. Lexi felt as if all restraints had been lifted from her. She began to tell in front of the grave everything that plagued her. Tears ran down her cheeks as she complained. "Daddy, I don't know what to do at all. I have to look for a place to live, because my heart knows that my mother is not going to exchange the apartment. I don't want to be stuck in there with those difficult people. I just feel sorry for Maggie, but it's not like I can't help her. I can't help myself." Of course, Lexi didn't expect to have an epiphany at the cemetery and realize how to proceed. But after recounting her misadventures aloud and not holding back her sobs, a blissful emptiness set in. After saying goodbye, Lexi walked to the side and reached out and stroked Eugene's picture. "Goodbye. And don't be offended if I can't come for a long time." Love was leaving. Logs were piled by the fence near some house, and the girl decided to see if there was any live and work in the town next to the village. She pulled out her phone, and in doing so, the smart device, the first assistant of modern man, completely discharged. Her nerves were already on edge without this unpleasantness, and although Lexi thought she had no more tears left, she cried again. The girl didn't notice anything around her, not even the buzzing mosquitoes that stung unprotected parts of her body. Lexi almost jumped when a mocking male voice sounded above her head. Hey girl, did you decide to make that pond? But it's no good. We have specially stacked logs here for building and you are pouring tears over them. Get up and come with me. Lexi raised her head, wiped away her tears, and looked at the handsome man standing in front of her, about 25 years old. The stranger held out his hand to her. So what was the tragedy? Lexi didn't share the details with the man and blamed her tears on her dead cell phone. But if you have a charger, it's not a problem. You have my house right behind you. There's a free outlet. Let's go. The man held out his hand to the girl, but Lexi was hesitant to trust the stranger. Joe, shouted a woman walking down the street. Who's sitting under the fence? The man smiled at Lexi and informed. Joe, it's me. And that's my mom coming. Judging by the bags, the evening bus has arrived, and she and the driver of the sister of the guests handed over. I'm going to run to meet my mom, and you don't go anywhere. We'll solve the issue with your phone. Lexi had nowhere to go. Without the information support of her smartphone, she felt too insecure, suddenly afraid that she might have forgotten the charger during her hurried packing. The girl opened her bag and searched for it. To her great joy, she had it with her. Lexi exhaled. Now all that was left was to find a place with an outlet. She could try going to the local store. But she had no idea what hours it was open until. Joshua, after taking the bags from his mom, stepped first and hugged the girl and asked, Well, now you're not afraid to go inside. It's not like we're going to be alone. Lexi replied, I'm not afraid, but it's probably not very comfortable. Oh, come on. What's your name, by the way? Because my mom won't understand that I'm bringing a strange girl into the house so easily. Lexi. Well, nice to meet you. Grab your stuff and follow me. You can meet your mom at the house, because I see you're already pretty bitten by mosquitoes. Joe put his bags on the kitchen floor and started charging his favorite phone. But it seems to be blinking. Now you have to wait a little while and then you can turn it on and use it, he said. Thank you, Joshua. Lexi started to thank him, but didn't have time to finish. The lady of the house appeared in the kitchen, breathing noisily. She looked at her guest carefully, rested her hands on her broad sides, and asked her son, Joe, this girl is not one of ours. Explain who it is that is our guest. Mom, this is Lexi. Lexi? The woman frowned. What are you from Glendale? Last name Swan. The girl didn't deny it, but clarified. I had to see Eugene Swan. Much to my regret, I was too late. Tiana turned to Joe. That's not her own daughter. Janie was complaining at the bus stop. She said she came in, gave her a heart attack, and went somewhere else. Joe couldn't resist an ironic remark. If Aunt Janie had had a heart attack, would she have gone to the bus stop instead of the nurse's station? Any alternative means of treatment practiced there? Tiana, as if not noticing her guest, replied to her son. Oh, Joe. Oh. You've got to be kidding me. Janie wanted to find that newcomer by the hair. She said she wished her mother had kicked her ass when Eugene brought her into the house to meet her. Janie knew right away that her son would be unhappy with that woman, and that's how it happened. But you remember how. He came back from town a few years ago. You should have buried him, honest to God. The women said he brought almost nothing with him. Left it all to his wife and his estranged daughter, Lexi, here. They said Maggie had given him some serious horns during the marriage. Joshua wrinkled his nose. Mom, you know I try not to listen to gossip. Tiana waved her hand and turned to the girl to satisfy her curiosity. Where have you been? You've been sitting under our fence all the time. Why didn't you go straight to town or to the station? Lexi answered. I went to the cemetery. You may not believe this, but I really feel sorry for my dad. I've never known any other dad. He was the one who wiped my tears when I got my first bad grade. He gave me my first bouquet of flowers, carried me on his shoulders, even braided my pigtails when my mom was busy. It wasn't easy to lose that kind of kinship all at once. She sat at the grave and didn't even notice how much time she spent there. Tiana's heart trembled, but she wondered. Why did everything stop at ours? Was it just by chance? Where I could sit, I stopped. I'm sorry to bother you. Now the phone will charge a little, and I'll go away. Joe smiled. Man, where are you going to go at night? By hitchhiking, of course, you can get to town. But a young and beautiful girl is hardly worth the risk. Mom, let's let Lexi sleep on the couch in the summer kitchen. It's warm, and she won't get cold. I'll take her tomorrow morning. Tiana was indignant. So as to rush to the aunt to pick up the transmitter, then you have no time. And when you go for a ride with a girl, I'd be happy to do that. It's not dark yet, though. We can pick honeysuckle, pea pods, and strawberries, radishes, parsley, and onions outside. It'll be fresher tomorrow morning. Take everything to your aunt and take it to her. Let her sell it. Now the first herbs, berries and vegetables are expensive. Everything will be a help. The woman shifted her gaze to Lexi and demanded, Anyway, while your phone is charging, let's go. Give me a hand, young lady. I need to get some rest since we're on the road tomorrow morning. Although picking small honeysuckle berries wasn't Lexi's usual task, she did it quite nimbly. Slowly but surely the cups filled with gray berries. Just as Tiana had instructed, Lexi didn't fill them to the top and compose them into the box with the cells. When the two bushes were relieved of their burden, Tiana called out to the girl, Come here. As Lexi approached, the woman outlined a new front of work for her. Look, pick the pea pods carefully, not all of them. Don't touch the unripe ones. You also need to make your bed. Lexi nodded. She wanted to thank the people who had decided to take her in. She didn't feel strong enough to go anywhere right now. At least a little respite was needed after the harvest was done. Tiana invited both her son and the uninvited guest to the table. It was only at that moment, when the smell of potatoes stewed with meat reached the girl, that she realized that all she had eaten all day was pies and soda at the train station. Trying not to look hungry, Lexi started eating. However, the attentive, scrutinizing glances Joshua was throwing at her made it hard for her to relax. The man really liked the girl, slender, modest, not a nasty character. She went together with his mother to the vegetable garden without any problems. She didn't even gesture her displeasure. And this despite the fact that it was obvious the girl is clearly a city girl, unused to the fresh air. She sits sluggishly after tea, her eyes closed. But the conversation her mother was having with her, asking about her life, was supportive. Joshua didn't really listen to the dialogue, but he even felt sorry for the guest who got instead of dinner to the interrogation, and he decided to stop the torment of the unfortunate. Mom, we're leaving early tomorrow. Just get Lexi some bedding, or else she just won't be able to wake up in time for tomorrow. Lexi, who was really tired both physically and mentally, looked at the man gratefully, and Joshua realized that he wished the girl would always look at him like that. He liked her more and more every minute. In the morning, Joshua drove Lexi to the neighborhood center, and as he prepared to park near his aunt's house, he asked the girl, Listen, are you heading back to your hometown or what? The girl shrugged. I don't know. I still have to think about it. I can't go home. I will probably look for a place in some children's institution. Of course, I don't have a diploma yet, but I have my credits with me. Maybe someone will take pity on a student. I'm looking for a live-in position. Joe slapped himself on the forehead and said, Look, why didn't I think of that? Let's go to my aunt's house together. Maybe she needs a helper for the summer season. She lives alone in her apartment, and I think she needs company. So Lexi found herself in a small district center 100 kilometers from his hometown at Joshua's Aunt Digit. The apartment was decorated in a minimalist style, and the girl was not very cozy in it. After a short acquaintance, the hostess asked Lexi to sit in the kitchen, and together with her nephew, she went into the far room and asked, Well, why did you bring me this girl here? I have a decent apartment, by the way. Your mom already called me and warned me that you may not come alone. She's the one that Eugene's dumbass raised as his own for years. Her nephew saved her from having to tell the woman the situation. Lexi had simply asked him to get her a job at the market. That's it? I'm not going to be alone, Digit snapped. No, Joe, I can't trust anyone I don't know. It's a trade, after all. especially since I've got a score to settle with that girl's mama. You were just a kid when Eugene brought that girl to the village to show her off. He wanted to marry me before that, by the way. How can I live in the same apartment with that bitch's daughter? That Lexi's family is rotten. So nephew, I'm sorry. Joshua tried to change his aunt's mind. But kids aren't responsible for their parents' sins. Or, in this case, the mother. Lexi seems pretty sane, so I don't think you'll regret it. Don't even say it. You want to help this Lexi. Give her some money to get home, and she can get a job in her big city. The wages are higher there, the landlady said. The hostess and her nephew entered the kitchen, and Digit said bluntly, I'm sorry, but I have my own private life, and your presence will be out of place. And I don't need any helpers. As they say, I can handle everything myself. Joshua didn't want to part with the beautiful Lexi, and he thought feverishly about how he could get her phone number. To the man's surprise, the girl wasn't upset at all, but even pleased. It's good that you don't have to. I was looking through the ads in my phone in a special boarding house, which somewhere, judging by the map, here in the area, requires a cleaner. Not a very prestigious profession, of course, but not deadly. In addition, an accommodation and food is provided. It's a fabulous offer. The only disadvantage is that there is no public transportation to this boarding house, as the smartphone suggested, so I would have to order a cab. A wild number just popped up on the screen. Joshua, I just have a favor to ask. Lend me the money to get there. As soon as I get my first paycheck, I'll wire it to you. But what if you go there, see it, listen to it, and you don't like it? Why don't I take you there? I'll wait to make sure everything's all right, and then I'll leave, Joe suggested. Digit, who had overheard this dialogue taking place in her kitchen, was not too surprised at his nephew's insistence. Joshua had always had a crush, ever since he was a little boy. I remember when he was about 6 years old, he brought a girl from the next street over to his house and told her that she was his fiancée who would be living with him. He also had a few hobbies at school. At the send-off to the army, at least 3 girls were shedding tears over him, and he had already grown up. After serving, Joshua returned to the village with his fiancée. She couldn't live in such conditions for long, though, and fled to her homeland before the wedding march. As far as Digit knew, Joe was not at all saddened by the failure of his marriage. He even seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and continued to lead an unmonastic life. And now the woman noticed a familiar gleam of excitement in her nephew's eyes. The hunter had his next victim in sight. Maybe she should have warned the poor thing, but Digit preferred not to interfere. First of all, this Lexi was clearly of legal age, from what the woman knew. Secondly, she had a beef with the woman's mother. Third, Digit knew her nephew. If he wanted the girl, he would get her. So let them do whatever they wanted, as long as they didn't touch her. Joshua gallantly opened the car door for Lexi, and Digit, watching the couple from the window, realized that the naive-looking young woman would have little chance to resist. Her instincts and experience did not fail her. Joe had really managed to get Lexi to like him, though he had to try harder, of course. Most of the thoughts of the girl, who was hired for a seasonal job at the boarding house, were occupied with the problem of housing. Lexi called her mom to see how she was going to solve the pressing apartment issue. But Tiana pleaded for more time. Daughter, but it's not that simple. We only have a 1-bedroom apartment in the bedroom district of the city, not a mansion on the main street. If you're going to do a 2-bedroom exchange, it's not going to work, she said almost every time she answered the same thing. Lexi, who monitored virtual bulletin boards in her free time and thought of different options, once couldn't stand it and said, Mom, and why did you even decide to change our apartment? Think about the fact that this housing you have a marriage. If you decide to divide it and then buy another apartment, then on its part will already be your future husband to claim in case of anything. I think it would be easiest to move Kieran to the apartment that his father Stephen rents to tenants. There was silence on the phone for a few seconds. Lexi guessed that there was some problem she didn't know about and asked directly. Mom, just answer me honestly, what's going on with your Stephen's apartment? Does he even have one? Or has he been bullshitting you all these years? Tiana, sighing, confessed. Stephen had an apartment, but he had to sell it in a hurry to keep Kieran out of jail. As it turned out, Laura had thrown him out of her home and life for a reason. Stephen did not tell me everything in detail, but the story could have ended badly for Kieran. Good thing the injured party agreed not to go to the police and settled the matter peacefully. Anyway, that's the way it is, daughter. Lexi kept trying to get her mom to understand that a person who had to buy her freedom with the price of an apartment could be dangerous. Mom, do you realize that? Putting himself and Maggie in danger. Obviously, this Kieran did not pick flowers from the flower bed or take change from other people's pockets. I mean, he's committed a pretty serious crime. And Daddy's a hard worker. Instead of letting his son go where he belongs, he sold the apartment and paid off a just retribution. Okay, Stephen's not afraid of his offspring. But why are you letting Kieran under the same roof as you and Maggie? Let him work, get his own apartment, and preferably far away. Lexi was not so much tired of the work, which to be honest was a lot, as from the constant persuasion. She could not persuade her mother to push her to close Kieran's access to the apartment. The only outlet for the girl was communication with Joshua. The man came to see her every weekend, and sometimes even on weekdays. At meetings, he showered her with compliments, brought various sweets and natural country products. The fewer days left until the end of the last shift, the more Lexi worried, not even knowing what to do. The deciding factor was one of the conversations she had with Joshua, who, hugging her tightly, whispered in her ear. "Ah, Lexi, my love, no other way than a spell lived. How will I be without you?" "I don't know. Why don't you transfer to a correspondence school and move in with me? I'm out to here. I'll wither away without you. I know you're all high and mighty, but I'm from the bottom of the ladder, as they say." Lexi didn't say anything, but she liked the idea of moving. She felt herself falling in love with this man who cared for her so easily. Plus, if she accepted the invitation, she wouldn't have to go back to her mom's apartment and watch the nasty faces of Stephen and his offspring. Of course, it would take longer to study by correspondence, but it would be possible to live with the person she loved, even without formalizing the relationship. While the girl was thinking, Joe whispered, "You do not think. I'm not just offering you to come and live without a registry office. I realize that it's probably important to you. Just a little before the wedding happens, you'll come to me. That's all." Lexi looked Joshua in the eye to make sure he was serious. And he, as if catching a shadow of doubt, confirmed. "Yes, I'm asking you to get married. It usually takes a month from the time you apply to the time you get married, but it means practically nothing. You'll live as a wife from the first day you step foot in the house." Lexi agreed and spun in a whirlwind of happy worries. Tiana wasn't particularly happy that her son had brought Lexi home as his bride, but she could hear laughter coming from Joshua's room. The woman, wrinkling her nose squeamishly, whispered softly, "Having fun. I wish they were ashamed of me." They'd decided to have the wedding on neutral ground in Hartford, where Lexi had spent the summer. The bride, who already guessed that she was pregnant with her beloved Joe, did not want a large celebration and was glad that the future mother-in-law supports her. "Oh, it's not fashionable to have the whole village together now," Tiana said. "Yes, and rightly so. The money that will be spent on food and drink is better spent on something useful. Joshua's car needs changing, the roof needs fixing. And buy you a new bed, not so creaky, I think." Tiana couldn't help but sneer. In the end, Lexi invited only Isabel's mom and Maggie to sit in a modest cafe. She didn't want to see Stephen and Kieran at the table on the festive day. On the groom's side, only his mother had come. Aunt Digit refused to participate in the celebration flatly. Both Joshua, privy to the long history with Eugene, and the bride's mom understood why. Maggie missed her big sister. She sat on her lap for almost the entire meal. When after a modest sit-down, relatives of the bride and the newlyweds with the mother of the newlyweds had to leave in different directions, the girl even cried. Lexi's tears flowed too. She already had a hard time controlling her emotions and nerves. After a month of living with the restless Tiana, they were stretched to the limit. The woman literally wouldn't let her lie down to rest. All she had for Lexi was to work in the vegetable garden and greenhouse, to roll up jars with crops, to cook and clean the house. It was the daughter-in-law who had to do everything. Joshua, of course, helped whenever possible. But Tiana, for example, when she saw her son peeling onions, she would chase him out of the kitchen. "What are you doing?" "Doing woman's work. Go do Devonian things do." If the unhappy young woman in her mother's apartment was not a sweet life, then here she sometimes wanted to howl like a wolf. Tiana had taken almost everything from her. When Lexi told her about her pregnancy and the fact that she was having trouble tolerating certain smells because of her toxicosis, her mother-in-law went ballistic. When she was alone with her daughter-in-law, Tiana would bring up the young woman. "You come on, do not pretend in front of me. What am I, wasn't I pregnant? If you're sick, take an apple from the dirt and get to work. You know, they used to give birth in the fields and it was okay, they were all strong." Lexi didn't have the energy to argue and prove anything. She almost always wanted to sleep. From a cheerful and active beauty, she turned into a lifeless creature with bags under her eyes. Lexi realized that the pregnancy was going very differently than her mother had carried Maggie and was terrified. One day she complained to Joshua. "I was told by Amelie from your paramedic office that swelling is the norm. When I told her that the internet advises further tests for such symptoms, she blatantly told me to go to the bathroom." Joshua: "I'm afraid Amelie is being a little careless with what I tell her. I don't have the best symptoms. Take me to the women's clinic, at least in the district center." Hearing this, Tiana didn't bitch. "Yes, our Amelie has experience as old as you are not. But a respected doctor should not be stipulated in my house. If she says you're normal, then you are. You're so smart. Do you want me to make remarks? That's right, she sent you away, you faker. You're a noble woman. If you don't trust Amelie, go to the district center. The bus runs twice a day. You leave in the morning, come back in the evening, Joshua won't have to travel. And the budget will be saved. You haven't brought a penny home, and you're still trying to ride our coattails to paradise. There's some dill on the shelf, brew it and drink it. It helped me with swelling." Showing thus care, the future grandmother went to one of her girlfriends, and Lexi, left alone with her husband, began to persuade. "Joshua, please take me to the district center. I feel like no amount of dill can help my condition. Why risk it?" The man nodded, but the woman was in a hurry to get somewhere and promised, "Okay, I'll figure something out." In the morning, however, when Lexi woke up, her spouse was no longer around. The woman got dressed and looked out into the yard. The car wasn't there either, and Tiana was fiddling in the front garden. "Good morning," Lexi greeted her mother-in-law. "Do you happen to know when Joshua will be back?" Without taking her eyes off her work, Tiana answered, "By tonight he probably will be. Digit had some kind of accident at work, and he rushed over to help." It was so frustrating that tears sprang from her eyes. Why didn't her husband wake her up when he knew she had to go to the district center? She would have packed in no time. To be more precise, she had everything already prepared for a visit to the counseling center. After getting a bottle of water, Lexi took her bag and, trying to calm down, headed for the gate. "How far are you going?" "I should pick some carrots. The forecast says it's going to rain next week." I heard my mother-in-law's voice behind me. "I'll go and wash them now, and then you'll go with a bucket and pick them." How to sit down at the table so you are in the lead, and when you help, so you run from the yard. Lexi turned around and, not holding back tears, answered, "I have to go to the hospital." "Where?" "Joshua could have given me a ride, by the way. Or did you talk him out of it on purpose so he could go alone?" "I've been working on my carrots. That's very thoughtful of you." Tiana was angry. "Oh, that's how you talk. That's a snake on your chest, on your bread." Lexi did not listen to what insults her mother-in-law would come up with and headed to the bus stop so as not to miss the bus. The woman managed to get to a paid appointment with the doctor only closer to lunchtime. As expected, additional tests were prescribed which could not be taken for free. However, the rather young doctor who was in charge of the appointment advised her, "I certainly do not have the right to force you to urgently run and take tests in a paid center. However, when I was in your place, I did exactly that. Now my son is already 5 years old, just thanks to the timely diagnosed problem and correctly prescribed treatment. It is scary to think what would have happened if things had been different." Lexi thanked the doctor and called her husband as she left the counseling building. "Joshua, I'm in the district center right now. Please drive up. I may not have enough money because I still have to take paid tests." The doctor wasn't exactly scary, but but I don't think there's any point in dragging it out now that I'm here. The man didn't apologize for leaving this morning without his wife. He even resented it. Do you know where I can get the money? Do you think I'm printing it? Lexi, hearing a woman's laughter and squeals in the background on the phone, as if someone was tickling someone, was so surprised she even ignored her husband's rudeness. Joshua, your mom said you went off to help Aunt Digit and you're out somewhere having fun. What is that supposed to mean anyway? Instead of an answer, however, the phone buzzed instead. In further attempts to call Joshua, the woman heard that the caller was unavailable. In the paid laboratory, the charming girl who was doing the paperwork asked if Lexi had eaten, made a discount, and after the blood draw even poured hot tea and offered cookies. Please help yourself. I can imagine how hungry you are. The time is well past 12. Lexi, embarrassed, asked how much tea and cookies would cost, and the girl laughed merrily. What do you mean? Everything is free. Here is a vase, there are candies. They are, however, tiny but very tasty. Take them, don't be shy. Lexi modestly took a few pieces, and when she learned that the next day the results would be sent to her email, she thanked the kind girl who had been much more helpful to her than her mother-in-law and husband. Barely had Lexi come up for air when she got a call from Joshua. Tell me where to pull up. I'm free. Lexi gave the address and was soon driving with her husband toward his village. The tired woman didn't want to cause a scandal, so she offered him a candy bar as a gesture of goodwill. Try it. A girl from the receptionist's office gave it to me in the laboratory. The man, who was expecting to find out about the relationship, realized that the threat of a quarrel had passed and gladly ate the candy. But Tiana, as soon as Joshua and Lexi crossed the threshold of the house, began to throw thunder and lightning. Son, that's just outrageous, Tiana exclaimed. All right, you're off to help Didget. It's the right thing to do, not to leave a relative in need. But after you, this one went off to the middle of nowhere. Lexi tried to defend herself with indignation. Actually, I told you and Joshua that I was going to the district hospital. By the way, I'm concerned about your grandson's health, Tiana. The doctor said that the test should be taken, and that swelling like I have is not normal. The old woman grinned. These doctors just want to get more money out of you. And it is still unknown whose baby is being carried. Probably slept with half the staff at the boarding house. And you're trying to fool your Joshua? You think your mom pulled that stunt? You think it's going to work for you? Tiana twisted the shape from her fingers and held it up to Lexi's face. I'm not Janie Swan, I won't stand for it. After this rant, she sat back in her chair, placed her palm on the left side of her chest, and turning to her son, stated, Joshua, get her out of my sight at once. If you found her under the fence, let her go there. That's where your whore of a woman belongs. You'll find a good woman. The sooner you get her out of your life, the better. Eugene was messing around with her mom. What's the result? She's lying in a cemetery, Janie Swan crying her eyes out. Too soft. She couldn't get her son back on her side in the first place, so she's left alone and unsupported in her old age. I don't want that for you or myself. Lexi's eyes darkened at her mother-in-law's words, and she tried not to faint, to the delight of her mother-in-law's gloating. The woman, slowly, leaning against the wall, began to move toward the bedroom. There were no tears, one solid fright caused by an unusual sensation. Her stomach felt strangely cramped, but Lexi knew with her female intuition that it wasn't from hunger. Carefully, trying not to make any sudden movements, she began to put things away. A few minutes later, Joe entered the room and began to coax. Lexi, what are you freaking out? It's not a big deal. Mom's overreacting. She doesn't really think that. Mom's sitting in the kitchen right now, worrying, taking heart drops. Lexi raised her head and looked at her husband. That's it, Joe. I've had enough of this family life. You know, when I had to run away from home, I promised myself that I would never take abuse. But for some reason, I've broken that promise repeatedly to this day. But that's not even the worst part. I'm terribly hurt that you can never say a word in my defense. I was wrong to believe that I could be happy. Lexi had barely spoken those words when another painful spasm pierced her. In a muffled voice, the woman ordered, "Get dressed." I don't feel well. Take me to the hospital. Tiana, who, as it turned out, was not sitting in the kitchen, but was eavesdropping on the conversation between the couple, intervened. Why are you helping your son? He just arrived from the district center, and again must take you somewhere. I won't let him go. By God, I won't let him go. Lexi, realizing that the bickering with her mother-in-law could be fatal, was already dialing the emergency number to call an ambulance. The 45 minutes it took for the paramedics to arrive were the longest of the woman's life. The pain would sometimes subside briefly, and then she would continue to gather her belongings. When her insides twisted like a tight spring again, she sat down in the computer chair, opened the back, and tried, despite the urge to curl up, to relax completely and breathe calmly and measuredly. Joshua went against his mother's wishes and volunteered to accompany his wife to the hospital. Tiana only managed to insist that her son ride in the ambulance instead of her own car. Upon waking up from the anesthesia, Lexi felt terribly thirsty and dizzy. Her vision gradually became clearer, but the woman looked around the room and saw empty beds in the corners, as if deepening gray shadows. Lexi blinked hard, and when she opened her eyes, she noted with satisfaction that they were gone. Gradually, the sounds returned as well. Lexi could hear someone pacing up and down the hallway, someone walking behind the wall, someone talking. Somewhere nearby, an elevator was making noise. Taking into account all sorts of devices that came into view, the specific odor of medicines and detergents, Lexi concluded that she was in a hospital. The assumption turned out to be correct. Soon a woman in a medical uniform entered, moistened Lexi's lips with a wet wipe, and greeted her. "Welcome back. How are you feeling?" "Nothing, just very dizzy," Lexi replied hoarsely. "My throat is also dry." "But that's normal. Anesthesia is a thing. What's your name? Do you remember?" "Lexi." "That's a great name. All right, Lexi. We're going to keep you here for a little while longer and get you back to your room. You're going to be under a doctor's care for a few days, and then home." "Excuse me, please, but what about my baby?" Lexi asked the most important question, but got a very evasive answer. "Lexi, I'm just an anesthesiologist. The doctor will tell you everything in detail, don't worry." Lexi nodded, which made her eyes blurry, and it was as if she fell into a viscous, unnatural dream. After waking up again, she felt much better, though perhaps she was even more thirsty. No sooner had the woman pressed the call button, unnoticed earlier, than a nurse with a gurney came to pick her up. "Well, my dear, let's slowly move here. I will take you to the ward now." Lexi was worried about the baby. As soon as the doctor approached her and began to ask questions about her well-being, the woman quietly asked, "How is my baby?" Lexi's downcast eyes made it all clear as some terms she didn't understand came through the water column. Toward the end of the explanation, the doctor spoke words of comfort. "The surgery was a success. You will definitely be able to become a mom after the recovery period. Of course, you rest now. In the evening in the treatment room for a shot, come by all means." The doctor left, fighting the urge to scream. Lexi looked at the nightstand by the bed and was pleased to see her bag. Reaching in, the woman pulled out her cell phone and dialed her husband's number. "Joe, listen to me and don't worry. Gather all my things, bring them to me at the hospital when I'm discharged. I'll let you know the date and time later. We'll stop by the registry office, file for divorce, and you can be completely free." The man tried to say something, but Lexi wouldn't listen to him. Running away from home, transferring to distance learning, and insulting her mother-in-law were now considered insignificant events compared to the loss of her child. Now Lexi decided to go back to the apartment where Stephen and his son had taken up residence and kicked them out. Would Mom like it or not? They didn't want to do it the easy way, so they'll do it the right way. We still have to find out what crime Kieran committed to expose the bastard. But that's after the dizziness stops. Instead of a few days in the hospital, it was a week. But it gave Lexi time to think things through. Calls from her mother-in-law were dropped, not answered. And when Tiana tried to talk to her daughter-in-law from her son's cell phone, Lexi cut off her lamentations. "You know what? You two go under the fence. And don't call me again. Joshua complied with everything Lexi asked and didn't even discourage the divorce. He just dropped the woman off at the train station. "Lexi, don't hold it against me and Mom. She didn't mean for this to happen. It was an accident." The woman didn't say anything back and didn't even slam the car door, even though she wanted to. Lexi hadn't warned her mom about her return. As she walked in, she was surprised that no one was in the apartment. On the one hand, that was a relief, but on the other hand, it was almost 10 p.m. And surely Maggie had to be home with someone. The bedroom Lexi shared with her little sister was relatively tidy, considering the little girl who lived there. In the rest of the rooms, however, the woman noticed signs of what looked like hurried packing. Lexi headed for the kitchen, automatically looking in the refrigerator. Lexi was amazed that the fridge was almost empty and put the kettle on. Just then, Isabel's mom and Maggie walked into the apartment. "Oh, my daughter." Isabel was so happy. "I'm so glad to see you." Maggie grabbed her older sister by the legs and began to persuade her. "Don't go away again." Lexi crouched down to hug the girl and began to comfort her. "It's okay. I'm not going anywhere else." Later, when Lexi read her little sister a book and the girl fell asleep, Isabel apologized to her daughter. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry you were right. Stephen and Kieran got involved with bad business. Now they're in remand. Kieran's old crime has also come to light." The two women sat in the kitchen for a long time, dropping tears into their tea. And then Lexi suggested, "Mom, let's sell this apartment and move somewhere else. There are too many unpleasant memories here." Isabel agreed. Soon Mom and her two daughters settled in a town 300 kilometers away from home. Lexi transferred to the local university. She also met a nice single neighbor at the front door. She didn't believe in lightning-fast love anymore and agreed to marry Jason only after a few years. Isabel, who had ruined the lives of so many loved ones by marrying Stephen, devoted herself fully to taking care of Maggie and the twins Lexi and her husband had. After accidentally seeing his ex-fiancée at a wedding, Ajay decided to humiliate her once again. But Ajay walked briskly through the night streets of the city where his childhood and youth had passed. His heart was beating in his chest like a bird in a cage. The smallest multicolored blots flashed before his eyes. The man's breathing was ragged, but he hardly felt it. Rather to be away from the restaurant, where such a surprise awaited him. After all, this trip was going to be pleasant, easy. Edward's childhood friend had invited EJ to the wedding. The man was surprised. He had long considered his friend a hardened bachelor. And here it was, a wedding. EJ was curious to see the woman who had conquered his free-spirited comrade, to meet his youthful friends again, to see his hometown, to remember the past. Of course, EJ could not refuse such an opportunity, at least some bright and warm event in a series of gray everyday life. The man even took an unscheduled week's vacation at work for this meeting with old friends. Ajay was a more than successful man, but how much he had accomplished, living and working in a big city, managed to escape from a provincial town. They don't know that EJ has been working for many years on an ordinary position in not the most successful company, and every day spends at least 4 hours to get to and from work, because he lives far from the office, almost on the outskirts of the city, in a far from prestigious neighborhood. His cramped 2-bedroom apartment has been in need of renovation for a long time. But EJ doesn't want to start this epic. Why should he? It will do. Lives alone, only sleeps at home. Why would a single bachelor need all this beauty? And he needs a lot of money. A man can't afford to pay a lot of money for repairs. His salary is not that absolutely beggarly, but excesses and luxury certainly does not assume. With a personal life also somehow does not add up. There are, of course, sometimes some romances, but it's not serious. Mostly ladies who have nowhere to live flock to Ajay. At his expense, they want to save on rent for the first time, until they get a foothold in the city. Ajay can see the intentions of these women. It's readable in their looks, their words, their actions. Unpleasant, of course, but perhaps by the age of 35, it is time to finally realize that pure, bright love does not exist. Everyone in a relationship pursues their own goals and interests. It seemed in my youth that someday I would meet the perfect girl. Beautiful, loving, intelligent, sincere. certainly household and caring, like a mother and grandmother. On the one hand, self-sufficient, able to occupy herself while her husband is out with friends. On the other hand, adoring her husband and ready to be his reliable rear. It is with her, with this smiling beauty, EJ and build a family. And they will live happily ever after. Remembering those dreams, the man was amazed at how stupid and naive he was. There are no such women, there are no such relationships. And in general, there is no such thing that in life you are completely satisfied with everything. This realization came gradually. Disappointments were waiting at every step: work, personal life, everyday life. How many plans and hopes did AJ have for the big city? When he was young, it seemed to him that he should leave his hometown and settle in the capital, and life would be brightly colored. Beautiful girls, great opportunities, lucrative job offers, nightclubs, fun parties, new friends. That's not how it works. A small two-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, cramped, and an old house and remote from civilization area. But even for these chalets, AJ still hasn't paid off. The family, of course, helped with the down payment, and helped well. With this amount of money, EJ could buy a huge apartment in his hometown and make luxurious repairs there. But in the big city, it was only a fraction of the cost of a dilapidated apartment on the top floor of a 5-story building. AJ was not discouraged. Then he was still full of plans and hopes and felt happy. Finally breaking out, that's exactly how the guy felt. Now everything would go right. Freedom strengthened the prospects, made his head spin. AJ was glad that he had managed to end his past life. It seemed to him that it was a prerequisite for starting a new life, like a rebirth. AJ left his mom, grandparents, friends, and Lexi behind in his hometown. His relationship with her was starting to take a turn for the overly serious. It was scaring AJ. She was certainly a good girl, pretty modest, caring, but the strength of her feelings scared the guy. And anyway, how many more of these years did he have ahead of him? Not to take her with him to the big city, in Tula with his samovar do not go. In the end, AJ quickly found a job. There were indeed many offers, but they were not as tempting as he had imagined at home. Nevertheless, EJ was not discouraged. He needed money to live and pay the mortgage. Besides, it is necessary to gain experience somewhere. Everything is still ahead of him, except that more than 10 years have passed and nothing has changed dramatically. EJ still worked at low-paying jobs. You need connections or talent to move up the ladder. Then there's the incredible work ethic, the love of work, the passion. AJ had none of those things. He served his working hours in the office as a duty, received a salary at the end of the month, most of which he gave to mandatory payments: rent, loans, mortgage. The rest he stretched until the next paycheck. EJ always liked beautiful girls, bright as stars with long, slender legs, shining huge eyes, self-confident, witty, ambitious. There were many of them in the big city, of course, but they were not attracted to AJ at all. How could a young beauty be attracted by a dull office plankton, living from paycheck to paycheck? What could he offer such girls? In his own town, AJ had once been an enviable groom, grandson of the head doctor of the local hospital, a student at a prestigious university. There the boy felt like the best of the best. He had a lot of friends, girls were looking at him. But AJ always dreamed of more. He dreamed of New York, believed that he was worthy of a much better and brighter life than the one he had in his native Jackson. EJ often spoke contemptuously of life in the provinces, calling his small homeland a backwater and a hole. He said he'd never stay here, but he didn't. What's the use? What did he accomplish? And there's no going back. First of all, AJ, during the years of his life in the capital, has managed to acquire debts in the form of loans. It's going to take him a long time to pay them off. And the salary in New York is still much higher than in Jackson. EJ realized that if he returned home, he would not get out of debt. And there's no one to help him now. His grandfather used to be in business. A respected and well-known man in the city, head doctor of the local hospital, but now he is on a well-deserved vacation. Sick, old, weak grandfather himself requires attention and care. And secondly, well, how can it is possible to return after EJ assured his friends that life in the slums is not for him? After the contemptuous words in the address of the small motherland, after. Okay, let's be honest, bragging to his friends. To admit to the whole city his failure and inadequacy, to sign in his own insignificance. But no, AJ couldn't do that, especially in the eyes of his old friends and relatives. Ajay was quite a successful and established guy. He lives in New York in his own apartment, works as an economist. The man diligently created an image of a man who was very satisfied with his life. Even in social networks, he exhibited photos that, in his opinion, supported the status of a prosperous New Yorker. Funny, of course, but sometimes the owner of the company, where he worked, EJ, organized for employees' corporate parties. And on EJ's page after such festivities appeared photos from luxurious restaurants. Once, a colleague of EJ came to work in an expensive foreign car, rented a used car from his brother. EJ took selfies behind the wheel of the car and posted the photo on his profile that evening. Ajay laughed at himself. And yet, so on and on it went. Ajay was giving the appearance of a life on his page that he never had. And he was getting tons of likes and comments from people he knew from Jackson. They were convinced that EJ had it all worked out. The ambitious plans of his youth had come to fruition, and EJ was fine with that. At least in the minds of his friends and relatives, he would be so successful and happy. Ajay grew up without a father. His mother gave birth to him, as they call it, for herself. Or to put it more simply and honestly, she took a whore. EJ was the fruit of a banal resort romance of a student, a high school student, and a young man who introduced himself as the owner of a small business. Who his father really was, Ajay didn't know, and believed that now he would never know. The man didn't even know his son existed and had probably forgotten about the affair that had happened so many years ago. Or maybe he was gone altogether. It's not a big deal. Mother, she knew nothing about her resort lover. It's just that her mother didn't plan a serious relationship with him. That's why she repeatedly learned the details of his life. Address and passport data certainly did not ask. Just wanted to have fun, being away from controlling and tutelage strict parents. And in the end, that's how it turned out. Ajay was an unplanned but beloved child. His grandparents insisted that their daughter give birth after all, though she seemed to want an abortion at first. Ajay suspected that it was his grandfather who had kept him alive. Grandfather is so authoritative, reliable, correct, and it is very difficult to argue with him. It must have been hard for him to accept the fact that his daughter had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. And yet the grandfather coped with himself and even made such an important decision for the whole family. The grandfather's reward was a grandson. He had dreamed of a son all his life, but in the end he raised 2 daughters. The older of them gave her father 2 wonderful granddaughters, but the younger one made the most pleasant and long-awaited surprise, finally gave birth to a boy. E.J.'s childhood was bright and happy. He was surrounded by loving relatives. His mother, however, did not pay much attention to her son. She was working or trying to organize her personal life. But EJ still felt her love. His mother often gave him toys, took him to amusement rides or to the movies. She was a people pleaser, cheerful, energetic, full of ideas and plans. His mother charged her son with optimism and love of life, and his grandparents, they did not give a damn. Ajay later realized that his grandmother was very sorry for him. After all, how can a boy grow up without a father? And his mother is not particularly engaged with him. He would appear like a ray of light and then disappear again. Therefore, the grandmother tried to compensate for the lack of parental warmth grandson and cooked for him delicious dishes and bedtime stories he read, and walked with his grandson for hours around the city, patiently going around with him all the playgrounds. A grandmother is warmth, unconditional love, and complete acceptance. No matter what AJ did, she was always at his side. Even if her favorite grandchild turned out to be guilty of something. If EJ was involved in a fight, grandmother unreservedly considered the other party as a scumbag bully who dared to hurt a good boy. If her grandson got a D, grandma would turn on the teacher for her prejudice. Ajay loved his grandmother too. It was nice to know that there was someone in the world for whom you were the light in the window, the best, most beautiful, and smartest. EJ had a different relationship with his grandfather. He did not particularly encourage dabbling, could shout at his grandson, and even spank him when his wife wailed. Grandfather set limits, and that was good too, because it paradoxically made EJ feel safe. Grandfather was as dependable as a rock. His words carried weight. He often had heart-to-heart talks with his grandson on a variety of topics: friendship, love, studies, life plans. Grandfather had been having such conversations with AJ, his boy, since he was a young boy. EJ adored these moments with his grandfather. and the grandfather often took his grandson with him to work. There the boy saw the respect with which other people treated his grandfather and felt proud of his relative. EJ realized that his grandfather was doing a very important job and doing it well. People were grateful to him. The grandfather took his grandson fishing and to the woods, and sometimes they spent the whole day in the garage, figuring out the insides of his grandfather's old car. Ajay suspected that his grandfather could have bought a newer car, but apparently the faithful iron horse was dear to him as a memory. The older relative tried to compensate for his father's lack of attention as best he could, and he did it well. EJ adored his grandfather, and as a child he dreamed of being like him. When EJ was about 6 years old, he saw a famous rock band on TV for the first time, and the boy was so mesmerized by this spectacle that he did not even hear his grandmother calling him to lunch. From then on, the boy never parted with the plastic shovel. He held it like a guitar and sang and danced just like the guys on TV. The adults laughed and clapped their hands. They were sure Ajay would outgrow his hobby. He didn't. At first the boy just listened to rock songs. Then he started singing along. The grandmother was the first to notice that her grandson has hearing and voice, and took him to a music school. Within these walls, EJ was disappointed. He had imagined everything quite differently. He thought the school had a stage and men in jeans with guitars. But the kid was put at the piano and forced to learn boring scales. It was unbearable. Ajay hated school after the first 2 or 3 lessons. But grandmother, always soft and supple, suddenly showed firmness. She was determined to make a musician out of her grandson, as his teacher assured her that the boy had talent and that E.J.'s sense of rhythm was innate. It turned out that his ear is amazing. But laziness, according to the teacher, spoiled everything. His grandmother did not want to ruin Ijai's talent, so she made him go to the hated music school for 3 years. And then the boy still dropped out, and not without the support of his grandfather, left the dismal institution. His grandmother regretted his action for a long time. She had already seen her grandson in dreams on posters announcing the arrival of the great pianist. But EJ was not like that at all stagey. The wise grandfather, who saw and understood everything, gave his grandson a real, beautiful guitar for the new year. And EJ somehow slowly learned to pick up melodies, something he looked up from his favorite performers, to what he reached himself. And he studied hard with self-tutorials. The boy was happy. He liked this kind of study without annoying instructions, unnecessary lessons like solfeggio and literature, compulsory in exams. Now the boy spent hours in his room, selecting compositions. And it worked. His father must have been musical, his grandmother sometimes said. A bear stepped on everyone's ear in our family. But this one is a talent. You can see it in him. EJ liked to imagine that his father was one of those rock musicians who packed million-dollar stadiums. He even looked for similarities between himself and the popular rock stars of the time. And he found it. He managed to find it. At school, EJ studied not that very well, but without failures. His mother and grandmother at first dreamed that he would follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become a doctor. But by middle school, it became clear the boy does not have the necessary aptitudes and abilities. Grandfather did not worry about it at all. He believed that everyone has his own way. And the task of adult relatives is to help the child to determine the future, to recognize his talent, which can later turn into a profession. None of the adults took his guitar playing seriously. That's why one day at the family council it was decided that EJ would become a student of an economic university. Why the profession is promising, monetary, just the right thing for a guy. EJ didn't mind, simply because he himself had no ambitions and plans for the future. Economist as an economist sounded good. It was better to study at university than to go to the army. And in general, student life seemed to EJ something like a never-ending holiday, a party. New friends and girlfriends. I can't wait. EJ liked it at the university. There seemed to be less control right away. It seemed that all his relatives suddenly recognized his only grandson and son as an adult. Grandfather even began to give more money for pocket money. It was beautiful. Everything was exactly as Ajay had imagined. Parties, hanging out in rented apartments with visiting students, going to nightclubs. That's where the guy's guitar skills came in handy. It was great to sit in someone's kitchen and sing funny or even hooligan songs. EJ The guitarist was always the center of attention and was very proud of himself. Girls started to look at him, a good-looking, cheerful guy from a good family. At school, EJ was somehow not distinguished by popularity, but at university he suddenly became an enviable groom. Of course, the guy took full advantage of this, had affairs, enjoyed his youth and freedom. One day, walking through the night city, a group of friends led by EJ was in a rock bar. The guy had no idea that there was such an institution in Houston. The bar was located in the basement of one of the houses in the center of the city. Unremarkable sign, minimal advertising. But inside it was a treasure. Several not too spacious, cozy rooms with soft, comfortable chairs and photos of rock musicians. On the walls, a long stand with high chairs and a stage with a microphone in the largest of the halls. Local musicians and bands and soloists performed there every night. They played and sang both well-known songs and compositions of their own composition. Some kind of special atmosphere reigned here. The old-timers of the bar seemed to have known each other for a long time and formed a single coherent organism. AJ immediately wanted to become a part of it. It was the very element he dreamed of plunging into. From then on, AJ became a regular at the bar. He watched the musicians' performances with bated breath and then applauded them so that his palms burned. The guy sang along with the soloists, sometimes even dancing. That's how it goes. Gradually, AJ became his own man in the bar. He got to know the musicians. Sometimes they even let him on stage between acts. AJ played for the bar patrons and felt a wave of energy coming from the audience. It was great. The guy was trying to be part of a band. He'd met a lot of people here now. To play concerts as a member of a rock band, this was E.J.'s dream since his early years, but there were no offers of cooperation. And when EJ tried to offer his services, he was rejected very carefully and gently, trying not to offend. AJ lacked something to realize his dream. Maybe charisma? Maybe charisma? Maybe talent, or both? He had to put up with it, but rock musicians were still idols and celestials for the guy. He liked to rotate in this environment, to listen to their conversations, to help them with performances. It was in this rock bar that AJ met Lexi. He still remembered that night. It was the end of May, time for university credits. AJ, as always, was having a hard time getting out of the trouble he'd gotten himself into. By habit, the guy did not spend the whole semester studying, and on the eve of the session he realized that he had to learn something, pay for something, and work off some credits. Like today, the teacher of economic theory agreed to give the negligent student admission to the session if he would repair his classroom. AJ spent the whole day on this alone. His legs and back ached from the unusual physical work, but now he had the teacher's signature on his transcript. AJ decided to visit his favorite rock bar after a hard day. AJ showed up at the rock bar alone. The buddies were all busy. Someone went on a date with a girl because it was Friday, and someone was diligently preparing for another credit. No problem. AJ had a lot of acquaintances in the rock bar, so he wouldn't be bored. And indeed, before he entered, he was already called by Andrew, a regular here. He was sitting with a couple of friends in the corner of the room at a table. AJ gladly joined them. Joking, talking about life-friendly conversation was going along until Lexi appeared in the room. The short, thin girl was dressed in a waitress uniform, black short shorts, a black t-shirt, a long gray apron, and a name tag on her chest. Her long brown hair was gathered into a high ponytail. There was a minimum of makeup on her face, but this girl didn't need it. Nature herself painted her face with bright colors, black eyebrows, long black eyelashes, beautiful peachy skin, and huge eyes of some unreal light turquoise color. This unusual combination of colors attracted EJ's attention. "And this is a new waitress. She just started her first shift yesterday," said Andrew, following his friend's gaze. "Cute. I agree, but I like Janie better. Too bad she quit." AJ nodded absent-mindedly at Andrew's words. All his attention was on the new waitress. He couldn't figure out what attracted him to her. Well, yes, pretty, but at the university he met prettier girls. This one was too skinny. Edward used to say, nothing to hold on to, but AJ couldn't take his eyes off her. Then he realized. He was captivated by her smile, dazzling and yet modest and warm. It seemed to light up the girl's face, making it even more attractive. EJ wanted to see that smile all the time. Moreover, the guy dreamed of being the one who caused it, this smile. It was a strange feeling. It had never happened to him before. They were silent at first, and it wasn't a tense, oppressive silence, but relaxed and calm. Neither Lexi nor Ajay felt a shadow of embarrassment or awkwardness. Then all of a sudden, both of them were talking. First, they discussed the previous night and the performance of a local rock band made up of yesterday's high school students. Lexi and Ajay agreed that the guys had a great future ahead of them if they kept it up. Finally, Ajay ventured into a more candid conversation. "What about you? Do you have someone in your life?" "No, I'm single." Lexi quickly replied, "What about you?" Ajay couldn't answer that question unequivocally. He always had someone. Right now he was kind of dating Katie, a girl from the parallel group. They had gone on a couple dates already, but for Lexi's sake he would easily give up all the others. This girl was attracting him more and more. Ajay asked the girl to tell him about herself. He wanted to know more about this mysterious beauty who made such a strong impression on him. Ajay was experiencing previously unexplored feelings. It was both gratifying and confusing. Lexi talked about her life simply and sincerely. Ajay listened attentively, eagerly catching every word she said. Her manner of speech, her calm, gentle timbre, her facial expressions, he liked everything about this girl, absolutely everything. He didn't want to part with her at all. He hoped that the road to her house would be very long. It turned out that Lexi was born and raised in the countryside. Her ancestral home is almost 100 kilometers from Haxton. It's a cozy and quiet place, but completely unsuited for the life of young people, like most of her friends' buddies. Lexi, having finished 9 grades, went to seek happiness in the nearest city. The girl entered a teacher's college. The profession of a teacher of junior high school, she chose it not on the dictates of the heart, just somewhere it was necessary to enter. The girl studied, got a diploma, but she could not work in her profession. She ran away after a couple of months of employment. "I realized that pedagogy is not my thing," Lexi admitted. Lexi shared her memories. "I could not convey to these little people how to solve examples or write essays. I know how to do it all perfectly well myself, but I couldn't teach and interest the kids. It is one thing to study in college, and another thing to practice. It's heaven and earth. I did not want to take on such responsibility, afraid to let the children go, to discourage their desire to learn, and I quit. Then I worked for a while in a private developmental center. A young, pretty girl with a pedagogical education was welcomed with open arms. It was quite different from school. Here it was not so scary to make a mistake or fail. And I myself have always liked to mess around with kids. But then the center went bankrupt and closed. I found myself on the street. I saw an ad for a waitress in a bar, so I answered it. I'm so glad your center closed," Ajay said. "I mean, if it wasn't for that, we never would have met." Ajay and Lexi started dating. The quiet, modest Lexi with her dazzling smile and short stare finally won the young man's heart. And she herself, Ajay, saw it, felt it, sensed it. Lexi loved him with all her heart, with all her soul. She did everything to make Ajay feel happy around her, even to the detriment of his desires and leisure. Ajay moved into Lexi's rented apartment very quickly. They started living together. Ajay's relatives weren't too happy about this fact. But what could they do? Ajay was a very mature guy. What he wanted to do, he did. Ajay was finishing up his degree at the university. Lexi was still working as a waitress. Her salary, his scholarship, plus monthly financial support from relatives, the young people had enough money. Ajay was resting his soul next to Lexi. He felt that this girl accepted him with all his shortcomings. Moreover, she even liked these disadvantages, seeing them, paradoxically, as pluses. What eyes did Lexi look at him with? With what attention she caught his every word. And how many compliments Ajay received when he played guitar for his girlfriend or sang to her. Next to Lexi, Ajay felt like someone incredibly needed, important, successful, almost perfect. It felt really good. And then Ajay didn't understand why, but everything started to change. Not at once, slowly, gradually. At first, Lexi's concerns stopped warming his soul. Ajay had somehow gotten used to her adoration and attention. Lexi made him his favorite toast for breakfast, tried to please him with something special for dinner. And it came out that the guy started to take it all for granted. Lexi no longer evoked the same feelings in him. The admiration, the interest, it was all gone. At first, Lexi seemed a mystery to AJ, so beautiful, quiet, modest. But the eyes gave away a bright nature, an exciting combination. But over time, the guy found out that there was nothing special about Lexi, an ordinary girl, even a little boring. And AJ had always been attracted to unconventional personalities. He feared mediocrity, grayness, ordinariness. He even had his own idol, Andrew Kalin. He was 10 years older than AJ. By the way, at one time Andrew graduated from the same school where EJ studied. But to enter the vocational school, where most of those who failed, in those years, the guy did not. He formed his own band and rushed to New York. There, Kalin made a dizzying career. No, he did not become a star of the first magnitude, but still gained some fame. Songs of his rock band played on the radio. The musicians gave concerts across the country and even had their own army of fans. Kalin possessed a sharp mind and mad charisma. AJ knew him personally. Andrew often visited AJ's house. His parents lived here. And every time he came to the rock bar, where he was always a dear guest, talking to old friends, listening to local musicians. Kalin, everyone here knew him and loved him. AJ considered himself a fan of his in general. He liked everything about the man, his open smile, his way of talking, his firm gaze. Kalin had amazing eyes, sad and thoughtful. It seemed that Andrew saw through every person with those eyes. EJ wanted to be like Andrew. He even tried to imitate him, but quickly realized that he could not. Kalin was a peace product, a star, a soloist, a leader. It was Lexi's shift that night. EJ had also stopped by the bar to meet some friends and listen to a new rock band. According to the stories of people he knew, the newcomers were showing promise. The evening went on as usual. Toward midnight, EJ suddenly felt some excitement. Turning around, he saw him, Kalin, in the company of several buddies. Andrew was walking to his favorite table, nodding politely to his acquaintances. AJ rejoiced. What a stroke of luck. There would definitely be no boredom here tonight. Kalin was a man of celebration, and EJ would be sure to socialize with him this evening. Only later, when the time is right. In the back of his mind, the boy still cherished the hope that Andrew would someday help him get him on stage, or put in a good word for him. He's a powerful man, after all. He has so many connections, so many acquaintances. Maybe Kalin will even get him in his band someday. Even if not in the main squad, just as a backup. Andrew lived exactly the life that AJ dreamed of: tours, performances, rehearsals, parties, communication with interesting people, beautiful girls, and most importantly, the stage. Andrew gathered stadiums, turned on crowds of people. He sang along. Thousands of eyes looked at him with admiration. Isn't that happiness? AJ seemed to have realized by the last year of university that he would not make a rock musician. And it's probably too late to start at that age. But seeing Andrew, the guy every time again remembered his dream. In his soul awoke hope. Andrew, he's a risk taker. After school, did not go to study further, put everything on the career of a musician. And he didn't fail. It's a pity that EJ did not have the courage for such a step. Back in the day, Colin's table was served by Lexi. She smiled at Andrew, as she did at all the customers. He would look at her, and occasionally say a word or two to Lexi. AJ didn't hear those phrases, but judging by the look on Lexi's face, it was something pleasant. To his surprise, AJ suddenly realized that he didn't like seeing his girlfriend being nice to Andrew. And this was clearly not about jealousy. No, AJ realized that Kalin was surrounded by beauties of all sorts, ready to do anything for him. Why would he want to hick Lexi? Yeah, hick. Now that he'd been living with her for a few months, AJ could see that there was nothing special about her looks. The guy himself didn't know what it was about her that had gotten to him back then. EJ was uncomfortable with the fact that he wasn't the one chatting sweetly with the star. He has to patiently wait for the right moment. And Lexi is quietly talking to Andrew right now and doing it so casually and naturally, as if she doesn't realize who's in front of her. Or maybe she really doesn't. A few more hours passed. EJ decided that it was time to talk to his idol and headed to his table. At the same moment, Lexi rushed over to Kalin with her order, and she swooped her tray at AJ. No, Lexi held the glasses with beer. Nothing even spilled out of them. The girl's good reaction saved the situation. But AJ still couldn't resist an irritated retort. An elephant in a china shop, the expression came out of his mouth automatically, the same words his mother used to bail out on AJ when he dropped or broke something. Lexi was embarrassed. She felt bad that AJ was emphasizing her slip-up to those present. If it wasn't for his caustic remarks, no one would have noticed anything. "Well, why would you do that?" Kaylin smiled encouragingly. "What kind of elephant is it?" "It's a very sweet and fragile young lady." AJ looked angrily at Lexi. After those words from Andrew, she suddenly irritated him even more. The girl, sensing this, retreated. The rest of the evening went great. EJ had a great time in the company of Andrew and his buddies. It was interesting to listen to their stories about their turbulent youth and concerts in the capital. What kind of trouble did they get into in their time? A whole movie could be made. EJ liked to feel himself a part of this company, even if only for one evening. These people lived bright, loud, and laughed heartily. Lexi's shift was over. She walked over to AJ, calling him home. Usually they always came home from the bar together. He just waved her off. He wasn't interested in her right now. "Is that your girlfriend?" Andrew asked. "More like a groupie," AJ answered without caring about Lexi's feelings. And she was standing right next to him and heard everything. But the guy didn't care at the time. He didn't want Kaylin to find out that AJ was in a serious relationship with a hick and a waitress. "You're lucky. I wish I had a groupie like that," Andrew said, winking at Lexi. She smiled sadly and went to the staff room to change. She was already very tired and wanted to get home as soon as possible. AJ showed up at the apartment where he had been living with Lexi for a few months now. Early in the morning, he thought Lexi was going to give him a scandal, well, or at least demand an explanation. Still, he'd been very naughty to her. He called her an elephant and didn't admit to the others that she was his girlfriend. But Lexi looked kind of guilty herself. She hadn't said a word to AJ, and then when he spoke up, she acted like nothing had happened. Looking at the guy with the same love, tenderness as before, and caring for him as well. Lexi's admiration and attention, which used to be seen as a gift of fate, now irritated AJ. What had recently seemed to be the girl's virtues had turned into her flaws. Not care, but obsession. Not natural beauty, but provincial simplicity. Not modesty, but stiffness. And yet, AJ was in no hurry to part with Lexi. She was comfortable with AJ. Lexi provided him with a place to live, cooked delicious meals, even ironed his shirts. And yet she didn't control his every move like his relatives did. She didn't demand reports, didn't limit him, didn't blow his mind with talk about the future. With her, AJ lived much freer than in his native house with his grandmother, grandfather, and mother. But EJ dreamed of more. He saw himself as a successful, established New Yorker. A bright girl with a model appearance, not Lexi from the province, should be next to such a person. The guy was looking forward to graduating from university, to move finally to the capital and start a new life. He didn't see Lexi around him. She was just a stopover, nothing more. But AJ's plans were almost ruined by a ridiculous accident. "We need to have a serious talk," those were the words Lexi had used to greet AJ from the university one day. He had just sat through 5 consecutive classes. Consequently, he had neither the energy nor the desire to talk to the girl, but she showed an uncharacteristic persistence. "Okay," AJ sighed. He realized that he had no way out. "I'm expecting a baby." Lexi lowered her gaze. She was obviously feeling very embarrassed. AJ felt like he'd been splashed with cold water. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "What's there to understand? It's simple. I'm expecting a baby." "Are you sure about that?" AJ asked with hope in his voice. "It can't be any more certain than that." "That's a twist. What about New York? What about AJ's plans and dreams?" Now it's all over. AJ tried to talk Lexi into terminating the pregnancy. He told her it was too soon for them to be parents. A baby needs a grown-up mom and dad, and they're almost kids. "I'm not ready," the kid was honest. "What kind of father am I? I haven't even finished university yet." "I get it." Lexi sighed heavily. "You don't have to worry. I'll raise him on my own." The girl looked so unhappy, so confused. And how could she be alone? AJ knew full well that Lexi couldn't handle it. Likewise, AJ knew he wouldn't leave her now, or rather he wouldn't abandon his child. Ever since he was a child, he had heard unflattering things about his own father. This man could not have known of his son's existence at all, and still turned out to be a scoundrel for not taking part in his upbringing. Grandfather, mother, grandmother, all together they managed to firmly hammer into EJ's head a simple rule: you cannot abandon their children under any circumstances. Anyone who does so is unworthy of respect, love, and a happy life. It is the gravest sin a man can commit. And now EJ finds himself in almost the same situation as his father once was. He is pregnant with a girl with whom he was just having fun, not planning a serious relationship. Only unlike his dad, EJ won't be able to disappear into the vast expanse of his immense homeland, and he won't be able to escape the consequences. No, of course Lexi won't go after him. She's not lying when she says she's going to raise the baby alone. But EJ's conscience won't allow him to remove himself from the situation. Well then, we'll get ready for the wedding. EJ sighed and forced a semblance of a smile. Well, I guess we'll just have to adapt to the new circumstances. Come to think of it, Lexi wasn't the only one to blame for this situation. EJ had a part in it as well. Lexi is certainly not the limit of his dreams, but she's a good person to live with. She's homemaker, quiet, caring. She'd probably be a good mom, too. And New York? It can wait. It's not going anywhere. EJ's gonna get his way. The boy honestly tried to cheer himself up with those thoughts. So what if it's a baby? The main thing is that it should be born in marriage. Decency will be observed. And then you can get a divorce and realize the old plans. True, you'll have to pay alimony for 18 years, but that's no problem. EJ would have such an income that these obligatory deductions would not do him any good. Lexi hugged EJ, snuggled up to him. I knew you were reliable and that you could be trusted, she said. Before, Lexi's confession might have filled EJ with energy and joy, but now she seemed like an obstacle, a stone around his neck, a problem. So he remained silent. EJ introduced Lexi to his relatives. How could he not? The wedding was coming up. She won their hearts right away. Her grandmother was especially excited. She tirelessly praised her grandson's bride and said that EJ was lucky to meet such a girl. Preparations for the wedding began. Lexi looked so happy, so excited. Her cheerful look annoyed EJ, and talking about the upcoming celebration pissed him off. Everyone around him was rejoicing, but he felt like a trapped animal. All his plans had gone to shit because of her, because of Lexi. Here it is, the long-awaited and cherished diploma in his pocket already. The defense was perfect. Now would be a good time to get on a plane and go to New York, start a new life. And here it was, the wedding, Lexi's glowing face, the baby. Lexi was still working at the bar. EJ, on the other hand, decided to take a vacation after a tough finish line. First credits, then exams, then a diploma. He would have time to work on it. There are times ahead when Lexi will be on maternity leave and he, EJ, will have to support his family. So he was entitled to a little rest before this race. More and more often now, EJ went to the rock bar to sit with his friends and have a beer or two. He looked with envious eyes at the young and not so young musicians performing on the stage. Some of them would stay in this small, godforsaken town. Some of them had a great future ahead of them. Looking at these people, EJ began to realize that he had done wrong with his life. A man is born and lives only once. He has no time for the unlove that goes for people and things. But commitments held EJ like a snare. He wanted to howl at the moon at such a life and prospects. His friends had no idea. They thought that EJ was just a little nervous about getting married and having a baby. That's just a normal thing. But EJ didn't try to dissuade them. He was suffering alone and desperately hoped that things could still catch up. Not now, but later in a couple years. His plans weren't overturned, just put on hold for the time being, just so long as this swamp didn't swallow him up. One such night at the bar, when Lexi was staying home and EJ was enjoying some freedom, he met Janie, a tall, dazzlingly beautiful girl. Long hair in loose waves down to her waist, tight jeans revealing a flat stomach. Top. She showed up surrounded by her girlfriends. They were pretty girls too, but all their virtues paled in comparison to Janie's beauty. EJ hadn't taken his eyes off her from the moment she entered the hall. He wasn't the only one. By the way, his friends had already left, and EJ was still sitting at the table, sipping his beer and watching. He liked everything about her, her smile, her loud laughter, her gestures. Janie was clearly a leader among her friends, and in general she behaved like a leader in life. She caught Ajay's eye a couple of times, and then a small miracle happened. She invited him to her table. Most of her friends had already dispersed by then. Two silent girls remained, who did not interfere in any way with the conversation between Janie and EJ. In the course of the conversation, it became clear that the young people had a lot in common. Janie was a couple years younger than EJ, and had also been raised without a father. Her grandmother and mother insisted that the girl should go to the law school of the local university after school. And Janie herself, as long as she could remember, dreamed of becoming an actress. She was attracted to the stage, creative environment, metropolitan life. "You're really going to be a great actress," Ajay assured her sincerely. "With such a stunning appearance. Yes, for you directors will arrange fights." "Thank you." Janie smiled without embarrassment. "I think so too, but I wasn't ready to argue with my mother and grandmother at that age. Not like I am now. At first I listened to my older relatives, and then, as I got older and stronger, I said I was an adult, and I wouldn't let them manipulate me and control my life anymore," Janie said. "Anyway, today I withdrew my documents from the university. I'm not going back. In a couple of days I'll take the train and go to New York forever. Even if I don't become an actress, I'm not coming back here." Ajay looked at the girl with admiration. How wonderful she was. Janie, unlike him, did not betray her dream, despite external pressure. She wasn't afraid to leave the university and go to New York into the unknown. In that, she's like the heroine of the movie. And Janie is bound to win, with such looks, character, and assertiveness. Next to this girl, Ajay suddenly seemed worthless and cowardly. But it didn't last long, because Janie suddenly kissed Ajay. He was dizzy with surprise. Was this for real? Such an amazing girl liked him? "You're awesome," Janie informed EJ, pulling back a little. Her huge brown eyes were like two dark pools in which one could so easily drown. "Why don't you keep me company? Come with me to New York. You're feeling a little cramped in this city, too. It'll be easier on the two of us." Ajay was dumbfounded and stared at his beautiful companion. She felt him so subtly, understood everything about him at once. "It's amazing." "Yes, of course," he nodded. "I'm with you." As he said it, Ajay honestly thought he could handle Lexi in the wedding. He'd figure something out later. Well, he couldn't say no to such an amazing girl. Maybe Ajay would never meet someone like that again. For sure. Because there's definitely no one else like her. That night, Ajay left the rock bar with Janie. She was driving her own old foreign car that her grandfather had given her for going to law school. Janie drove the car admirably beautifully. Ajay admired her confident movements and slim profile the whole way. Then they were outside of town, in some deserted field. A desolate place. Janie turned off the engine, turned to Ajay, smiled. But how could she resist? They greeted the dawn, lying in each other's arms on the unfolded seats. At that moment, Ajay had no doubt that he would break up with Lexi. He wouldn't give up the baby, of course, but there would be no wedding. It wasn't easy telling Lexi the truth. But Ajay wasn't going to cheat either. Why would he do that? He's not doing anything wrong. He met someone else, fell in love. It happens. After all, he wasn't Lexi's property. He was a free man who was free to do with his life as he pleased. But Lexi looked at Ajay with those eyes. There was hope and adoration, love and tenderness in them. It was hard to tell the truth when looking into those devoted eyes. Ajay felt like the ultimate scoundrel as he bluntly shared the news with his now ex-fiancée. "Lexi," he began. She flinched. It was as if Ajay's words had caused her physical pain. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Are you in a hurry? You don't know this Janie at all. Beautiful girl. You're young. I get it. It's a fling. But why take it out on me? If you want New York so badly, let's go together. There's nothing keeping me here anyway." Ajay felt his anger boiling up inside him. This girl doesn't understand anything. He wants to go to New York to start a new life. The one he's dreamed of for so long. Maybe even make it as a rock musician. If it doesn't work out, he'll work in his newly acquired specialty. New York is a city of opportunity. He didn't need the burden of an obsessive Lexi and a baby. Lexi cried, begged, apologized. Ajay never realized why. The guy was angry, insulting the girl, trying to hurt her as much as possible. He realized that he was being cruel to Lexi, but his angry words were his way of trying to break the connection with the annoying girl, to push her away from him. And she was really starting to annoy Ajay a lot, pissing him off like never before. Ajay reminded Lexi of her country roots, her not always literate speech and narrow-mindedness. He accused his ex-fiancée of lacking ambition, calling her a dumb peasant, a burden. Lexi nodded in response to all these insults, agreed and promised to change. Another woman in her place would have gotten angry, started insulting her unfaithful fiancé back. But she clung to EJ with all her might and was willing to forgive him absolutely anything. It even felt a little good. Next to Lexi, Ajay felt like a prize, almost a deity. See how she was fighting for him. The guy realized that by humiliating the girl he was trampling her, but he couldn't stop. He was getting revenge on Lexi for causing him so much trouble, and he was also asserting himself. Eventually, Ajay left Lexi's apartment, slamming the door. At that moment, he felt light and free. No, of course, the kid wasn't going anywhere. He'd have to pay child support. Maybe even socialize with him. Ajay didn't want to be as mythical a character in the eyes of his own son or daughter as his own father. Of course, he wouldn't keep the child. He would be an occasional presence in his life, and of course provide for him. This little man will eventually realize everything, and will be proud of his successful, determined father. Ajay decided to dispense with explanations with his relatives. Things would hardly go as smoothly here as they had with Lexi. He'd call later and tell them everything. When he gets there, he'll leave a note. And by the way, ask them to keep an eye on Lexi and the baby. No matter how hard he tried, Ajay couldn't get the baby out of his thoughts. He already felt responsible for this little life. The 24 hours before leaving, Ajay stayed with his buddy Edward and then the train station. Janie's shining eyes, heading off to her new life with only a light backpack, a long road trip behind her. Ajay withdrew all his savings. His grandfather set aside a tidy sum for his grandson EJ to save each year. It was, he said, the startup capital that every man needs. Now this money came in very handy. EJ used it to rent an apartment for him and Janie. They lived on it for the first time, until they found a job. Grandfather, grandmother, mother, they were always trying to call AJ. Probably wanted to tell their son and grandson that they resented what he'd done. Thought they could influence him, maybe even bring him home. But the kid dropped those calls. He explained everything to them in a letter, and to talk to his relatives until they cooled down, had not the slightest desire. And then time would pass, things would settle down. Ajay will find a job. To get a job in the capital, he will have something to please his own. That's when they'll talk. Until then, it wasn't time. Janie thought AJ was doing the right thing. Older relatives are often the ones who drag us down without realizing it, she said thoughtfully. When AJ dropped the call from his mother again, I thought, they're trying to force us into their own boxes, trying to make the kids live by their own rules. But we're not their property, and we don't have to organize our lives to please them. We are individuals, adults. Ajay agreed with every word Janie said. True, they hadn't been together long. The young beauty had quickly found a wealthy patron in the capital and had gone to him without a second thought. Ajay felt abandoned, humiliated, lost. He felt almost physically hurt by the girl's betrayal. He thought he had finally met his soulmate. Janie understood him like no one else, and he agreed with every word she said. It was a rare thing. It seemed like the two of them could do it together, to conquer New York shoulder to shoulder, and now it's happening. But the boy couldn't suffer for long. He had to find a new place to live, look for a better paying job. Going back was out of the question. After a month and a half of fruitless searches, EJ finally got lucky. He was hired as a junior economist in the staff of a not too successful, but obviously reliable company. It seemed to the guy that this was just the beginning, the start of his way to a successful, prosperous life. But more than 10 years passed, and still there. EJ still worked at a not the most prestigious position. He had barely moved up the career ladder, and he didn't have any prospects. Then, after getting a good job, the guy called his mother. He was ready for a serious conversation. Yes, of course, the mother will shout, accuse her son, maybe even demand that he return. But the parents surprised Ajay. How could you do this to us, to Lexi? That question, the reproach, was quite expected. The boy remained silent, letting his mother blow off steam. But her next phrase made an incredible impression on him. Lexi was so worried about your betrayal that she lost her baby. She ended up in the hospital, barely saved. We called you to tell you Lexi was in the NICU. And you never answered? Ajay was digesting the news. Oddly enough, he was hurt at the thought of the baby being gone. In theory, a guy should be happy the problem had solved itself. But he felt a mixture of pain, disappointment, and unspeakable longing. Did Ajay get over it? Of course he had. Now it was even easier to turn the page and start his life over. Ajay worked hard, with prospects, saving money. His whole life consisted of reports and traveling from the office to home and back. No partying, no bright new acquaintances, and certainly no beautiful girls. Ajay had completely abandoned his guitar. It was now gathering dust in a corner, unneeded. There was no time to play, no mood. After a couple of years, Ajay managed to take a mortgage on a small apartment in an old house in the suburbs without repairs, but it was his own. Relatives helped with the first installment. Further, the guy himself then sincerely rejoiced, thought that the beginning was laid. But again, time passed and nothing changed. Ajay lived in a tiny two-bedroom on the outskirts of the capital, spending a lot of time on the road to work. Pulled money from paycheck to paycheck, saved on everything, and only in social networks on his pages carefully built the image of a successful man. It seemed to be working out pretty well. Ajay knew that his friends and relatives from his hometown were watching him. Let them think that their fellow countrymen had succeeded. Ajay's personal life didn't work out. No, he had the occasional fling. But all these ladies were like one, they had to stay somewhere for the first time. E.J.'s apartment was being used as a staging area. The man was well aware of that, and now he was already thinking of Lexi with longing and nostalgia. Her care, tenderness, love, sensitivity, attention, respect. Next to her, Ajay felt like a king. She gave him the feeling of wings behind his back. And the others, they always only used Ajay. The man understood it perfectly well and agreed. Where could he go? Back then, in his youth, it seemed to Ajay that he would have many more like Lexi. Only as the years passed did he realize that strong feelings and sincerity in relationships were rare. Only there was no taking anything back. Ajay was very happy to get a call from his old friend Sam. They had been together since high school and until E.J.'s departure for New York. Life, of course, divorced the buddies in different directions, but they were still connected by many things, warm memories, common childhood and youth. All of this does not disappear without a trace. Now it turns out Sam has decided to settle down after all. He has a wedding coming up, and he invites his childhood friend, who now lives in New York, to the celebration. But what a New Yorker will find time in his busy schedule for an old friend? 100 years have not seen each other, and here is such an occasion. This half-joking phrase once again convinced EJ that in his hometown he is considered quite established and happy man. The activity in social networks was not in vain. EJ has never once traveled to his hometown in all these years. His mother, grandmother, and grandfather themselves have been to visit him a few times. And AJ? He didn't want to go back for some reason. But now the man suddenly felt that he was ready to see his small homeland again, to meet old friends for whom he is a successful economist from New York, to walk along the streets familiar from his childhood, to visit a rock bar, to feel himself not a gray loser, but the capital's successful guest who managed to build a career, to get out of the wilderness. It's so great, isn't it? Of course I will, Sam Ajay replied to his friend. Ajay arrived in his hometown in the late afternoon. He didn't take a cab. He decided to walk. Not much had changed here. Same dusty stretches of highway, same sidewalks, same lush greenery. Familiar streets, parks, squares. A strange feeling came over the man. He longed for his past self, young, full of plans and hopes. It seemed that he was not like all the others, ordinary. They would stay in this city, and he, EJ, he would be something like Andrew Sokolovsky for the people of the city, acquaintance with whom the locals would be proud. It didn't work out. Of course, EJ lives and works in New York, but it's not what he once dreamed of. True, the locals don't realize it. At least for 1 week, Ajay would feel like the man he wanted to be when he was younger. That was good. The family greeted his son and grandson with joy and warmth. They hadn't seen each other much lately. Grandmother and grandfather. The older relatives had become quite old, and once they had both seemed energetic, strong-willed, all-powerful. Time spares no one. And Mom is no longer the beautiful young woman she used to be. They're the only people on the whole planet who care about AJ. When they were gone, the man didn't even want to think about the days when he would be all alone. The next day, Ajay met Sam and his fiancée at a coffee shop. At first, AJ was confused by so many strangers. Then his friends responded to him. All of them came to the party with their other halves family, serious people. They all had children, jobs, apartments, cars. Looking at old friends, standing on the arm with their wives, AJ once again felt that his life was passing somehow aimlessly. Solemn wedding, obligatory promenade with a photographer to the memorable places of the city. Champagne was flowing. The guests cheered, laughed, and showered the newlyweds with compliments. Edward and Nayli really looked great, beautiful, in love, happy. Then it was the restaurant's turn. Ajay was relaxed by then, getting to know everyone he didn't know. The guests treated him warmly and friendly, asked about New York, spoke respectfully about EJ's career. Everything was exactly as he had imagined. At the restaurant, the dressed-up crowd was already waiting for the toastmaster, a cheerful, smiling fellow. A new batch of guests had gathered on the porch. It was here that EJ got a surprise he hadn't expected. Among the crowd of newcomers, he saw Lexi. At first, the man couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it was just a dream. But why would she be here at all? Lexi had changed, of course, but not so much that Ajay didn't recognize her. Still the same huge turquoise eyes, long, slightly wavy hair. Slender, touching, almost transparent. Only now there was a confidence in Lexi's gaze that made her face even more attractive. Lexi was wearing a flowing dress of a marvelous emerald hue that went so well with her eyes. Her hair was nicely pinned up, revealing her beautiful face, and it spread over her graceful shoulders. She looked much younger than women her age and radiated warmth and energy. Ajay could feel it even from a distance. "Is that Lexi?" Ajay turned to Kaylin standing next to her. "What is she doing here?" "Lexi?" Edward invited her, Edward answered. Ajay grinned. Kaylin wasn't helping him much. Lexi noticed him at that moment too. Their eyes met, and Lexi smiled. That beaming smile of hers had a strange effect on Ajay. Ajay didn't even immediately remember what a beautiful, radiant, warm smile Lexi had, illuminating her face with some special light. On the one hand, she charmed him. But on the other hand, the man felt anger rising in his soul. Yes, he was angry at Lexi. For some reason, she was the one he suddenly assigned blame for his life not working out too well. Lexi had been just a clingy girl back then, years ago, annoying and demanding of his attention, unwilling to give him freedom. She was the one who had made him run away to New York when he wasn't quite ready for it. It's all her fault. And now Ajay is forced to live a miserable existence. And Lexi showed up at the wedding so beautiful, clearly successful, confident, and smiling at him now with a sense of superiority. Ajay nodded dryly at Lexi and hurried off into the crowd. But now the celebration was no longer as enjoyable as before. Ajay watched from his seat as Lexi cheered. She talked easily with the guests. Many knew her. She laughed. She danced. Lexi was being asked to dance by the men. The young lady was clearly a success, which is not surprising. But strangely enough, she showed up to the wedding alone. Colin said Edward invited her. Why would she do that? Was it because of him, Ajay? Lexi was clearly enjoying herself, and everything seemed to be going well for her. Her jewelry seemed to be modest, inconspicuous earrings and a thin necklace. But Ajay was well aware of how much it cost a fortune. As were Lexi's shoes from a decidedly not budget brand. Ajay recognized the signature red soles. Lexi didn't look like she lived in her town at all. She looked modest, yet expensive and sophisticated. The local ladies were old-fashioned, preferring to shine at events like weddings, bright makeup, flashy clothes, flashy hairstyles. Lexi stood out to them. And for some reason that pissed Ajay off. He felt like Lexi was looking at everyone with superiority, including himself. Ajay wanted to bring Lexi down to earth, to show her who she really was, a country girl. A former waitress he'd left years ago because he didn't want to commit to a country girl. She shouldn't be acting like a queen here. Ajay is the capital's guest at this wedding, not her. The man was waiting for the right opportunity, and now it presented itself. Lexi, picking up the tray, hurried over to an elderly woman, seemingly the bride's grandmother. She was feeling ill from the heat. Lexi noticed this and rushed into the kitchen. She came back with a tray with a carafe of cold water and a couple of glasses. Ajay hurried toward his ex-fiancée. He wanted to humiliate her. A suitable phrase was already ripe in his head. Hey, the past just won't let go. Waitress reflexes in action. Those words were meant to remind Lexi of her past, of who she really was. Lexi looked up at Ajay with surprised eyes and seemed a little confused. Just like that, all of her outer gloss had come off. Lexi hadn't changed a bit, and it seemed that Ajay was still a huge influence on her, just like before. Hello to you too, Lexi said quietly. She placed the tray in front of the old lady and stepped back. Ajay, pleased with himself, went to his seat. He felt almost happy. Yes, he had succeeded in hurting Lexi. Now she didn't look so arrogant and radiant anymore. That's great. Ajay asked a young girl, who seemed to be Nayli's niece, to dance. The young lady had been casting amorous glances at the lonely guest from the capital all evening, having fallen under the spell of a supposedly successful man from New York. Young people fall for them nowadays. EJ decided to take advantage of the impression he made on the girl and asked her to dance. She gladly agreed. The man did it for Lexi's sake, let her see how much fun he was having here and how popular he was. It seemed that AJ had succeeded in achieving the desired effect. Lexi looked up at him, hugging her young cousin, the bride, in a dance, and there was sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was jealous. Perhaps she still had feelings for him. It was nice to think so. But it wasn't enough for the man. He wanted others to make fun of Lexi. Why, he didn't understand. Perhaps by humiliating her, he felt more successful and important. Silly, of course, but that's the way it was. Ajay watched Lexi discreetly, waiting for the right opportunity. And lo and behold, it happened. The girl didn't notice the champagne spilled on the floor and slipped, awkwardly swinging her arms. This moment was seen by many people. Lexi almost fell. At the last moment, she managed to hold on to the column. Someone I hid, someone smiled, and Ajay uttered at the top of his voice. There you go, just like you were an elephant in a china shop. You're still an elephant in a china shop. Are you talking about the elephant in the china shop again? Came a suddenly familiar voice. Ajay shifted his gaze from Lexi to the man at her back and couldn't believe his eyes. It was Kalen. He had recently arrived at the restaurant, otherwise AJ would have noticed his idol. Kalen, keeping his eyes on AJ, offered his hand to Lexi, helped her up and gave her a familiar hug around the waist. Ajay couldn't believe his eyes. Lexi looked sad at that. The elephant in the china shop. Is that what you called her at the bar back then, remember? AJ nodded, though that moment had been erased from his memory. But since Kalen says so, it must have been. That phrase of yours is how my introduction to this beautiful girl began. Kalen smiled at Lexi. So thank you for that. But don't talk to her like that again, or you'll be dealing with me. Kalen seemed to be joking while saying that sentence, but his eyes were very serious. A stunned Ajay returned to his seat. His lady, his young cousin Nayli, sat down next to him and began to chatter something excitedly. But EJ was not concerned with her. He was looking at Kalen, who was very gently supporting Lexi by the arm. A crowd immediately gathered around them, of course. Edward was there as well. Old acquaintances were drinking, cracking jokes, discussing something cheerfully. But AJ couldn't bring himself to join them, even though he really wanted to. He was too stunned, lost, confused. I don't understand anything. What's even going on here? He uttered at last. Kalen, what's he doing here? Isn't he a buddy of Edward's? Edward has known him since his youth. Kalen is his idol, replied E.J.'s young companion, and she happily told everything she knew. It turned out that Kalen, who has made a good career in New York, often visits his hometown. He has parents here who didn't want to leave their small homeland, and friends, of course. Kaylin kept in touch with Edward and his buddies all this time. They often met at the rock bar. Ajay would have been in that hangout too if he hadn't left. Gradually, an almost friendly relationship developed between them all. Lexi? He met her at the same rock bar. The girls shared details. They say she was insulted by some guy right in front of Kaylin, and it was because of that he paid attention to her. He liked her immediately. Kaylin fell in love with her, even wrote songs for her. In my opinion, those songs he wrote for Lexi are the most beautiful. But I think she was in love with someone else at the time. Some unhappy love affair she had. That's how I would edit this text. Who can resist Kaylin? And this girl was hoping, expecting something from her old boyfriend. He'd done something bad to her, dumped her before the wedding, I think. And that's when she was in a terrible state. Nayeli said Lexi was even in the hospital. I don't know what happened to her, but AJ knew. He knew why Lexi was in the hospital, because she was so distressed. She lost her baby, their baby, Edward and Nayeli told me. Lexi didn't go back to work at the rock bar. She went to her family in the country. And Kaylin found her, got her address through some acquaintances and went. Kaylin himself. It's such an amazing story. I never would have believed it could happen. Don't believe in fairy tales after that. Yeah, it's a really unique story. For some reason, Ajay was picturing it all very vividly. It was like watching a movie. Kaylin went to the rock bar every night, hoping to meet the waitress who charmed him. Of course, he learned all he could about Lexi from mutual acquaintances. Edward, Sergi, Andrew, all of them, of course, knew about AJ dumping Lexi before the wedding and moving to LA. The guys didn't judge. They understood their friend. Especially since he wasn't going to give up on the baby. They even supported him. Approved of this deed. Well, everyone can fall out of love, but dreams should come true, Andrew said in a deep voice when he found out AJ was leaving. Kaylin saved Lexi, pulled her out of the depths of despair. Been there for her during the most difficult time of her life. At first, Andrew came to her village every day. Every day E.J.'s young companion exclaimed adorably. But she, it's strange, didn't want to be with him. Is that how it's possible? I can't imagine it. Such a man. And she must have loved that old one of hers, the one who left her on the eve of her wedding. But Kaylin kept visiting her. It's so romantic. So of course Lexi melted. And they've been together ever since. They got married? Ajay saw once in the press about Kaylin's wedding, but there were no photos from the celebration online. And Andrew preferred to keep his private life private. Ajay had no idea that Kaylin's wife was Lexi. Lexi, whom he had run away from years ago, and for whom, apparently, he still had some feelings. Why else would he suddenly have this strange desire to humiliate her in front of everyone? Yes, they got married, said AJ's companion. The wedding was here, by the way. Both of them didn't want to make a fuss about the event. Everything went quietly, modestly. Then they flew to New York and now live there. They flew here for a couple of days to visit Andrew's parents. Edward found out about it and invited them to the wedding. Pretty cool, huh? Lexi got here first. Kaylin had some urgent business to attend to, but here he is. Aren't they a great couple? Ajay looked at Andrew and Lexi. They were sitting at the other end of the table surrounded by guests. Andrew had his arm gently around his spouse's shoulders, and she had her hand on his knee. Idle. They really looked like a harmonious couple, and looked great together. Ajay suddenly realized that he was the one who wanted to hug Lexi and look into her eyes. He's the one who wants that woman's smile. He would never again meet someone who would love him so genuinely. Ajay had tried many times, but it was all wrong. He himself, with his own hands, destroyed his happiness years ago. And now his reality is this: he works for pennies, lives alone. No friends, no favorite woman by his side, no children. The man who was once his idol and whom EJ still sincerely admires, Kaylin considers him a scoundrel. And quite rightly so, by the way. They have kids as if reading his mind. AJ's companion completed the picture of Lexi's current happy life. She had no idea that AJ was the abusive groom who had abandoned his bride before the wedding. Otherwise, it was unlikely she would have spoken to him in such a friendly manner. The boy and girl are twins, continued EJ's companion. I've seen them, they're so cute, like the babies in the commercials. Ajay felt like a lowlife. At first he had wanted to make a splash with his acquaintances, to come here as a visitor from Los Angeles. Successful, more successful than his friends in Nashville. At least for a couple days, to feel like someone more important than he was. And wanting to humiliate Lexi was pathetic and ridiculous too. She was doing so well in her life that his attempts to ruin her mood seemed silly, to say the least. Ajay couldn't stand to be here anymore. The very atmosphere was weighing on him. The sight of happy faces, familiar faces from the past, made him sick to his stomach. It was not enough to start behaving inappropriately in front of everyone. Ajay felt close to smashing a plate on the floor, smashing a wall with his fist, or worse, crying. He was cut short by a cloud of all sorts of emotions. Ajay realized he had to leave silently, quickly, without saying goodbye to anyone. Kalen himself was here. It was unlikely anyone would notice his disappearance now. The man got up and headed for the exit. Hurry, hurry, we must hurry. Hurry to get far away from here. It didn't matter where. It was not a matter of the first importance. And so AJ wandered through the night streets of Nashville. He's already gotten a decent distance from the restaurant. His feet carry him toward downtown. The man passed a rock bar. No, he had no desire to return to that place. He left behind the public garden where he spent so much time with his friends. Bypassed the amusement park. He had many memories with each of these places, mostly happy and pleasant ones. He didn't want to go home. His mom, grandfather, and grandmother would be there. They'd start asking Ajay about what happened, worrying. No, it's better to be outside alone. Ajay would come back later, when the family was tired. The man walked through Nashville wherever he was going. Crushed, confused, he felt like a complete non-entity and regretted coming to his friend's wedding. Wait, there's no way I can catch up with you, came a voice from behind him. The man turned around. The same young girl, the bride's cousin, was rushing towards him. What are you doing here? You left so suddenly. I followed you. Your face was strange and very sad. I think she blurted out. Why did you follow me? The man wondered. Well, because I didn't feel like breaking up with you. The man looked into her pure, sincere eyes and wondered, could he, so lowly and mean, really like this young creature? To all appearances, the girl was really enchanted by him. Strangely, but it made his soul warm. He realized that all was not yet lost. He's only 35. A whole life was ahead of him, and what kind of life it would be depended only on him. Obviously, he's made a lot of mistakes. But he's only human. The main thing is to make the right conclusions and live on, live happily. Something needs to change in yourself and your worldview. If the previous actions led to such a deplorable result, it means only one thing now: it is necessary to act differently. That's all. The girl looked at him with hope. In her eyes he saw admiration. No, the man was not going to take advantage of the young beauty's naivety. Right now he would just walk her to the restaurant, and there was no telling what might happen to a young girl on the street at night. He'll say something encouraging and wise to her goodbye. He's an adult, after all, and will leave this town. He's got a long way to go to work out his mistakes. But it's going to work out, it's going to work out, it's going to work out.